Chapter 1874. The toad-face was full of resentment as he walked towards the table of the elders with a woman whose thin lips left a deep impression. Just then, a table near the official road was about to pay and leave. The man and woman sat down and ordered 2 bowls of calming soup. The woman with the saber lowered her voice and said, "The woman who is good at retaining her youthful looks is Lu Jejuan, the leader of the Misty Peak of the Huainan sect. She is a second-grade grandmaster. I don't know why she has a deep relationship with the Qi cultivators of the northern sect. She has 2 kinds of mysterious finger supernatural powers. Now she is on good terms with the Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui, and has a good relationship with the Ministry of Justice of Liang." The man who spoke just now was called Feng Zongxi. According to the spy report of the Fu Shui Chamber, this person was once defeated by the Fist Master Ya of the Martial Emperor City during the last years of Yonghui. They fought for more than 40 rounds. The people of Liang Jianghu called him the Divine Fist of the Central Plains. He was ranked alongside Fairy Fei Chan, Lu Jejuan, and the Purple Sandalwood Monk as one of the 16 rogue immortals. As for the man with the spear bag, judging from his luggage and his accompanying disciples, he is most likely one of the 12 chiefs of Auspicious Talisman, Li Zhongho. He is also one of the 4 sages. The Whisk Chamber did not have any records on him. He is a newly emerged martial artist of the Central Plains. Among the 3 of them, only Li Zhongho is considered to be capable. The man at the same table was none other than Su Fengnian, who had escorted Bai Yu out of Qingcang City in Liuzhou to Liuxia Town. Mr. White Lotus and the white-robed monk of Liangchan Temple, Li Dongxin, had once sparred in the decennial debate between Buddhism and Taoism on Mount Longhu. Moreover, he had just received news that his good friend, Qi Xianxia, had already joined forces with Chai Qingshan of Dongyue Swordpool. Therefore, no one wanted to miss this Wudong debate. Su Fengnian, who had his back to the table, nodded and said softly, "Although he is much weaker than Su Yanbing, his cultivation should be about the same as Han Laoshan's. His methods are also the same. Both of them are bold and powerful. Moreover, great talents mature late. He has the chance to become a great grandmaster like Spear Immortal Wang Xiao. If you fight with him, your chances of winning are not high." The woman who became the manager of the second branch of the Whisk Chamber with Mi Fengjie said indifferently, "I only know that I can definitely kill him." Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. What's there to be proud of? It's a loss of life in exchange for a life. Fan Shaochai remained silent. Su Fengnian glanced at the young man in green who occupied a table not far away. "Is there no record of this person in Fu Shui room?" Fan Shaochai was taken aback. He shook his head and said, "No." Su Fengnian explained, Great Peace City's Qi Jiajie and Northern Mang Sword Qi were close to Huang Qing, and there was also Martial Emperor City's Lu Huang, who gave up Dao to seek skills. When they met a mortal enemy who was on par with them, they were all covered with sword Qi. Most of the swordsmen in the world were like this. Their sword Qi was far more important than their sword will. Even if they did not show it after returning to their original state, once they made a move, they would be able to see everything clearly. Only a very few swordsmen were born with high spirits, which is the so-called natural sword embryo. For such a rare genius, as long as they were enlightened and had a little luck, they could often achieve the achievement of a sword immortal on the land. Fan Shaochai looked at the ordinary-looking young man out of the corner of his eye and frowned. "Him too." Su Fengnian nodded. "So many grandmasters of the sword have left over the years. Naturally, someone will rise. For example, if Gu Jiantang and Lu Xianlang of Nanjiang suddenly die, it will take about 5 or 6 years for someone to amaze the world." Fan Shaochai's expression was strange. He glanced at the young king who still had a cold saber hanging from his waist. "If you, the great grandmaster of saber-wielding, died, who would you bring that torrential Guangling River's blessing and grace to? Would it be Wang Shang, Yu Dilong, and Lu Yunzhong, the 3 disciples? Or the woman surnamed Jiang who was also a sword embryo? Would it help her become an earth immortal?" Su Fengnian, who had guessed her thoughts, glared at her fiercely. Fan Shaochai drank tea with one hand while the other hand under the table rubbed the hilt of the saber. Her slender hand, which had never done any household chores, was now holding the killing blood saber. Fan Shaochai suddenly asked, "Are you really not going to climb the mountain?" Su Fengnian, who had a slightly strange expression, shook his head. "I'll pass. But if you want to join in the fun, you don't have to follow me to North Resisting City. I'll help you talk to Chu Lushan. I think you might as well go to Mount Wudong." After all, such a grand occasion may not be seen again in the future. Fan Xiaochai laughed. No matter how high Mount Wudong is, it's higher than you. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes. No matter how much you flatter me, it's useless. Even if I die young, I won't pass my luck to you. Fan Xiaochai laughed it off. After drinking that bowl of calming soup, she really did have a sense of calmness. Fan Xiaochai suddenly tightened his grip on the hilt of his saber, his aura surging. Even the toad-faced man in the distance could feel his strong killing intent. This was Fan Xiaochai's style. If she wanted to kill someone, she would always do it openly. There was no victory or defeat, only life or death. The young swordsman, whose strength she couldn't see through, stood up and walked towards them with a cup of tea. He sat down without any courtesy, facing the young lord. Su Fengnian smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't mind that the unknown swordsman had taken the liberty to disturb him. After the man sat down, his expression was solemn. He said seriously, I didn't expect there to be a man as handsome as me in this world. Nice to meet you. Fan Xiaochai couldn't help but twitch her mouth. She had seen shameless people before, but she had never seen such a shameless person in her life. Then the man turned to stare at Fan Xiaochai. Miss, your saber is good, and your saber skills are even better. Unfortunately, your saber power is not satisfactory. Fan Xiaochai smiled. Oh. The man raised the teacup in his hand like a private school teacher. He said methodically, in my hometown, there is a blue and white porcelain cup that is popular with the ladies of noble families. When held in the hand, the slightly slanted edge of the cup is pressed against the edge of the hand. The cup's size and weight are just right, and it fits the hand well. Therefore it is known to be a pressure cup. Whether it's tea or wine, it can be pressed against a woman's body. On the other hand, your innate physique is not outstanding. You only relied on your family's teachings and the foundation of your sect to achieve your current level of cultivation. But in the long run, it will inevitably harm your body. You must know that momentum are the most important things. Your cultivation, however, is the opposite. It's like a woman with a mediocre capacity pretending to be bold and drinking from a big bowl. It's not a long-term solution. Fan Xiaochai said flatly, Are you my father? The man thought for a moment and said calmly, Of course not, but I can be your husband. Su Fengnian, who drank tea much slower than Fan Xiaochai, almost spat out the tea in his mouth when he heard this. Fan Xiaochai smiled slightly, as if she was not angry at this lecher's licentious words. But her saber was already unsheathed. The man had been holding the cup in his right hand and resting his left hand on his knee under the table. At this moment, he suddenly raised his left hand high. It was clearly a casual and ordinary movement, but it made the head of the Whispering Room's assassins, who were numb to killing, feel their scalps go numb. They felt as if they were hallucinating. When the saber was unsheathed, it meant death. Chapter 1875. Fan Xiaochai's saber-wielding hand trembled slightly. Even against Mi Fengjia, who was superior in both martial cultivation and experience, Fan Xiaochai had never felt such fear. More importantly, she had never feared death. The young swordsman did not take advantage of the situation to attack. He only turned to the owner of the tea stall and shouted, Add 3 bowls of calming soup. Su Fengnian smiled. Impressive. Su Fengnian said to Fan Xiaochai, Don't be nervous. This young master has no ill intentions. Fan Xiaochai's face was pale, her eyes gloomy. When the owner of the tea stall placed the 3 bowls of calming soup on the table, the man nodded. Of course I have no ill intentions. Ever since I entered the Jianghu, I've always thought that I would become a divine couple with that Shen Yuanzi of Mount Hui's Great Snow Plains. But after seeing this young lady, I feel that she will definitely miss out on a good match like me. Su Fengnian had to repeat. Impressive. The man then turned to Fan Xiaochai and said considerately, It's fine if you want to kill me, but it's best if you drink the tea and find a secluded and spacious place. When the time comes, I won't retaliate and will let you attack me. Fan Xiaochai took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the hilt of her saber tightly. She gnashed her teeth. Are you courting death? The man gave an unexpected answer. His expression was incomparably serious. I'm looking for you. Fan Xiaochai's eyes were filled with the determination to face death. She pulled out her saber without a care for anything else. Just as the tip of her saber was about to be completely exposed, her aura reached its peak. The young swordsman, who had been expressionless all this time, smiled for the first time. He leaned slightly forward towards Fan Xiaochai and pointed 2 fingers of his left hand at the space between Fan Xiaochai's eyebrows, stopping just an inch away from her. There was a great deal of meaning in this movement. Fan Xiaochai quickly leaned back in an attempt to avoid the attack. But the man released his fingers and gently pressed his palm on her shoulder. Shocking crimson blood seeped out of the corner of Fan Xiaochai's mouth. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. This move of his was truly impressive. It wasn't because of the amazement of his moves or his aura, but because of the depth of his intentions. Fan Xiaochai raised his arm and casually wiped away the blood. The young swordsman was still holding her shoulder. He stopped smiling and said earnestly, "Miss, when it comes to imposing manner, righteousness is the same as evil and evil. The difference is that the former is like this post road where several riders can walk side by side. The latter is like a single plank bridge where there is only enough space to stand on. It is not easy to turn around. People's depression is heavy and it is hard to get rid of it. Why is there a saying that the people of the world have to speak their mind? That was the logic. Our martial arts cultivation, whether it's the saber, the sword, or the fist technique, is a long-term thing. How can you reach the top in one go? Even if you're an immortal on Earth, you still need to take a breath of fresh air when fighting to the death." Fan Xiaochai's lips were tightly shut. In fact, at this moment, her mouth was already full of blood, and she couldn't even say the word scram. But she still didn't want to spit it out. If Su Fengnian, the king of Bailiang, was the person she wanted to kill the most in her life, then this fellow who had been kicked in the head more than once by a donkey was second. He had already surpassed Chu Lushan, who had personally turned her into a death warrior of the Fu Shui room years ago. Su Fengnian sighed and raised the bowl of calming soup that had just been delivered. He poured half of it into the empty bowl before handing it to Fan Xiaochai. She hesitated for a moment before taking the white bowl. She shook off the man's hand on her shoulder and turned around. Lowering her head, she spat blood into the bowl and drank it all in one gulp. Perhaps apart from Su Fengnian, only the Snow House Spear saintly Hong Ho of the Jianghu people around the table had figured out the mystery. Even in the eyes of Lu Jejuan of Ethereal Peak and Feng Zongxi, the master of fist techniques, there was nothing special about the young swordsman other than his speed. And that speed seemed to be all there was to it. As for the others, they were even more confused. That young swordsman looked at Fan Xiaochai's back, wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, he didn't say anything. He turned to Su Fengnian and asked, "You are either an ordinary person who has never practiced martial arts or a top figure who is skilled in qi cultivation. Otherwise, I would have been able to sense the uniqueness of your qi flow. But since you have the guts to walk around the city with a cold saber hanging around your waist, and you have this girl with you, I believe that you are not simple." Then, Su Fengnian waited quietly for him to continue. But this time, the young swordsman didn't disappoint. "Then may I ask for this girl's name?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "She used to be called Fan Xiaochai, as in hairpin. Now, she is called Fan Xiaochai, as in firewood." That person nodded and said, "As I expected, they are both good names." Su Fengnian was speechless. After roaming the Jianghu for so many years, had he finally met an opponent whose skin was as thick as his? It was just that when he was at his lowest point in the Jianghu back then, other than his face, he still relied on his face to beg for water from the village women. He was invincible and had never been defeated. However, the person in front of him purely relied on his face. That person thought for a moment. "Forget it. I wanted to ask you something, but there's no need for that now. In any case, it doesn't matter whether I go to Mount Wudong or not." Su Fengnian, who already knew the young swordsman's identity, asked with a smile, "Why doesn't it matter? Are you really not going to compete with that king of Bailiang?" The young swordsman was astonished. "You know who I am?" Su Fengnian nodded. He rubbed his chin and said in realization, "It's not easy for you to guess my identity just from my appearance. But then again, it's also reasonable." Su Fengnian began to understand Fan Xiaochai's feelings a little. Fan Xiaochai had already turned around and placed the white bowl on the table. He stared at that person and said, "I must kill you." That person was neither mocking nor angry. He grinned brightly and said, "As you wish." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "You're not joking?" That person sat up straight and said in a deep voice, "I never joke with people. If I really like someone, shouldn't it be love at first sight? I don't think that falling in love with someone is the only way to do so. Instead, it's only after falling in love with someone that we'll be able to do so. What, you don't believe me? Su Fengnian looked at this young face in a daze. He thought of the old man in the sheepskin coat and that green-robed fengdu cultivator. It turned out that there were still fools in the Jianghu. They were unreasonable and did not need to be reasoned with. Su Fengnian smiled and said softly, I believe you. Fan Shaochai asked expressionlessly, Who are you? Su Fengnian couldn't help but rub his brows. As expected, this fellow was starting to hurt him invisibly again. Miss Shaochai, I like you. It has nothing to do with whether you like me or not. Then he winked at Fan Shaochai. Don't be surprised if I don't like you one day. Fan Shaochai was on the verge of breaking down. He roared, Who are you? Only then did the young swordsman put his hand on the hilt of his sword. He looked at her with clear eyes and smiled. Tai Bai Sword Sect, Chen Tian Yuan. He paused for a moment and then said loudly, So, the only time I don't like you is when Chen Tianyuan's sword is broken. The young men and women at the nearby tables who were drinking tea or chewing biscuits all spat out their mouths. Tai Bai Sword Sect, banished immortal Chen Tianyuan. In the 100 years of Jianghu, Chen Tianyuan was still the most talented swordsman after the spring and autumn sword armor Li Chungang. He was the fastest to break through. Lu Jejuan and Feng Zongxi looked at the snow hut spear Saint Li Chung Ho at the same time. The latter nodded slightly. He should be the one from Tai Bai Sword Sect. The toad-faced beauty and the thin-lipped beauty sitting at the same table as the three seniors looked at each other. Didn't they say that the banished immortal of Tai Bai Sword Sect was famous for his white clothes, white horse, and white sword when he first appeared in Jianghu? Didn't they say that the banished immortal was as handsome as a celestial immortal? Su Fengnian slowly raised his teacup. He wasn't in a hurry to drink the tea. He looked into the distance and was lost in thought. This person's current scene. The scene when he left. There was once an old man who liked to pick his feet and said angrily, What old sword god? It's the sword god. There was once a wooden sword ranger who was so poor that he didn't even make a sound. He said heroically, If a peerless swordsman with the surname Wen appears in Jianghu one day, there's no doubt that it's me. Some people were no longer in this world. Some people were no longer in Jianghu. Some people were still in front of him. After Su Fengnian came back to his senses, he put down his teacup and shouted to the trembling shopkeeper of the tea stall, Do you have any green ant wine? Give me 2 pots. Now that Bailiang's jurisdiction had banned the brewing of wine, the newly brewed green ant wine was destined not to be available in the taverns and restaurants of all sizes. Most of the wine was stored in the cellars of previous years. This tea stall had to do business with foreign Jianghu people. After all, a bowl of calming soup only cost a few coins, which was far easier to make money by selling wine. Therefore, the shopkeeper specially bought some relatively coarse aged green ant wine. There were 4 or 5 pots left, so he brought 2 pots to this table. The price of 1 pot now was about the price of 4 pots of green ant wine a few years ago. Fortunately, Bailiang didn't have the habit of diluting water. Green ant wine was good and bad, but they were all authentic. As the Jianghu people of the Central Plains swarmed to Mount Wudong, someone shouted, If you don't drink green ant wine, you've come to Bailiang for nothing. Chen Tianyuan asked, You're treating? Su Fengnian nodded and said, You treat me to calming soup, and I treat you to green ant wine in return. What's wrong with that? Chen Tianyuan said seriously, There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I don't drink wine. Su Fengnian said in surprise, There's a swordsman in the world who doesn't drink wine? Chen Tianyuan pointed at himself and said matter-of-factly, I'm one. Su Fengnian looked at the 2 pots of green ant wine on the table and felt a little embarrassed. Chapter 1876. Other than Su Fengnian and Chen Tianyuan's table, the ones with the most complicated feelings were the frog-faced, thin-lipped girl and the other arrogant young people. If they were in Liang province, they would undoubtedly be the most outstanding. But they were afraid of comparison, just like the cold beauty with the pipa on her back. No matter how many followers she had in Huainan Jianghu, when she really walked into the bigger Jianghu and was lucky enough to come in contact with the top martial artists of level 1-4 realms, these heavenly scenery, she would feel guilty. When the young banished immortal of Tai Bai Sword School was far away, as Jianghu disciples who were about the same age as him, they were amazed, doubtful, and more envious. Now that he was in front of them, They had mixed feelings and felt that he was unattainable. It was inevitable that they felt ashamed of their inferiority, but they also hoped to talk to him. They knew that they relied more on their sect and their master to walk in Jianghu, but Chen Tianyuan was different. It was said that there was a person in Beimang who had a sect. Then Chen Tianyuan, who broke through level 2, Vajra and Finger Xian in a short year, was not much inferior. This young swordsman who left his peers in the dust was qualified to be on the same level as their backer. As for his future, it was even more immeasurable. Among the 4 masters of the Liang River Lake, there was no doubt that Chen Tianyuan's future was the highest. How high was it? Maybe Chen Tianyuan was as high as sword armor Li Chungang and Su Fengnian. The frog-faced girl whispered to Feng Zongxi, whose nickname was well known. Master, this young man of Tai-Bai Sword School, has his martial cultivation really entered the Finger Xian realm? The short but unique fist master nodded and said, "It should be true." The thin-lipped girl's eyes were shining. How could she not know that the ordinary-looking man in green, who was unwilling to take a second look after glancing at him, was the future leader of Jianghu in the world in her mind? The difference was big, but the surprise was also big. Although Chen Tianyuan wasn't the second Li Chungang in the rumors, and at the very least, he didn't look like a romantic and elegant person, as long as his talent in swordsmanship wasn't overstated, it was enough for her to willingly rely on him. Feng Zongxi chuckled softly and said, "Chong Feng, I'll take this opportunity to tell you a secret. Do you know why those who reach the top of the world sword principle can often become the #1 person in the world of Jianghu?" Do Chong Feng grinned and said, "Master, please speak, disciple is listening." Feng Zongxi slowly said, "There are tens of thousands of people who practice martial arts. Putting aside the people of the 3 sects, the swordsmen in the world pay the most attention to destiny. Their decline is another's rise, and they all strive to outshine others. At the end of the day, how can I allow others to snore beside my bed?" Do Chong Feng seemed to understand. The thin-lipped woman sitting beside Lu Jejuan of the Ethereal Peak asked gently, "Is it just like the number of land immortals? There's a fixed number." Lu Jejuan, who had the occult finger technique, nodded with a smile. Do Chong Feng nodded and said, "That's similar to the officialdom. There are 6 ministers, 6 positions, and everyone has their own position." The spear sage of the snow house with white hair lowered his head and sipped his tea. The corners of his mouth twitched, full of disdain. Do Chong Feng asked carefully, "Master, can I go sit at the table of the banished immortal?" "Heh, I'll just take it as a chance to get some immortal qi." Feng Zongxi nodded. The toad-faced man trotted over and said enthusiastically, "I'm Do Chong Feng, may I?" Chen Tianyuan did not pay any attention to the new top 10 young masters of Liang Jianghu. He turned his head and looked directly at Feng Zongxi. He had seen Fan Shaochai at almost the same time as the man surnamed Do. Chen Tianyuan remembered Do Chong Feng's face clearly. Feng Zongxi, the Grandmaster of Taekwondo, who was also in the front row of the Great Snow Square with Lu Jejuan of the Ethereal Peak, was a little displeased with this young man who had been in the limelight for a while. However, his expression remained the same. He did not follow Chen Tianyuan's instructions and ask his disciple, Do Chong Feng, to return to his seat. Do Chong Feng's talent was average and his temper was even worse. Since Feng Zongxi was able to reach his current level of martial arts and had to deal with people from all walks of life, he naturally had a discerning eye. However, Do Chong Feng was the son of an aristocratic family with a prominent background. He was not the eldest son of the first wife, and his family's worshipper was a grandmaster who had retired from Jianghu and lived in seclusion. Feng Zongxi was indebted to him in the early years, so Do Chong Feng became the proud disciple of the Central Plains Divine Fist Master. Moreover, Feng Zongxi was a man of Jianghu and valued his reputation the most. He was a man of honor and would only accept a toast and not a forfeit. Although Chen Tianyuan had a great reputation and was known as one of the 4 young grandmasters of the new martial arts evaluation, Feng Zongxi was not afraid of this young banished immortal whose sect was far away from the Central Plains. At the very least, he had Lu Jejuan, whose sect was deeply intertwined, and Li Zhongho, who could only die under the great snow cone spear. Therefore, Feng Zongxi would not lower himself to show weakness to a young man. If word got out, he would not be able to survive in Jianghu. Do Chong Feng, who had a toad-like face with his master's support, immediately made up his mind. Since he could not win over this genius swordsman of the Tai-Bai sword sect, he would take advantage of this opportunity to destroy a guy whose reputation in Jianghu was even higher than his. Chen Tianyuan, who was dressed in a green robe, slowly stood up and said calmly, "From today onwards, my sword will be renamed Firewood." Obviously, this sentence was only for Fan Shaochai. Su Fengnian held back his laughter and glanced at her. Fan Shaochai seemed to be completely indifferent. Chapter 1877. Feng Zongxi frowned. If it was an unwritten rule in the Chinese world of Jianghu, if there was not a great disparity in strength between the two parties involved in a conflict and both parties knew each other well, they would definitely sit down and talk. It was also fine if they did not sit down. Even if they still had to fight in the end, they would still stand and talk first. He did not expect that this rising star did not understand the etiquette at all. Do Changfeng wanted to see the world in chaos. He fanned the flames and said, "Young Master Chen, I don't mean anything else. Why won't you give me face? Fine, even if you don't want to know me, I'll take it as my unrequited love. But my master, the leader of the Snow Hut sect, and Fairy Facian are all here. Why do you have to say the name of your sword and be so aggressive?" Chen Tianyuan, who had his back to Fan Shaochai, said softly, "Don't worry, I won't lose." Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. "Don't you know that Fan Shaochai wants you to be hacked to death?" After the young man who held up an entire sect by himself said this, his aura changed completely. He did not even hold the hilt of his sword. There was no sword aura around him. But his sword aura was soaring, 3 feet above his waist. Like a river. Su Fengnian looked up in the direction of the great lotus peak of Wudong Mountain. He felt a headache coming on. At this moment, Feng Zongxi's expression finally changed. He thought that he had overestimated this sword Dao banished immortal, but now he knew that he had underestimated him. Even Lu Jejuan of the Misty Peak, who was in her 50s but looked like she was 18, had to stand up and act as a mediator. She said in a hoarse voice, "Young Master Chen, it's fate that we met by chance. Why do you have to fight?" Chen Tianyuan said in a low voice, "I have the reason. The sword is at my waist." Lu Jejuan smiled bitterly and said nothing. Young people really did not know the depth of the Jianghu. So what if you defeated this Central Plains divine fist? Feng Zongxi had worked hard in the Liang River Lake for 30 years before he managed to accumulate his current reputation. It could be said that he had friends all over the country, especially the great steward of the Great Snow Plains, Huang Fengfua. Since Tai Bai Sword Clan had already become one of the 10 great sects, they would definitely be involved with the Chinese plains in the future. Tai Bai Sword Clan, which was located in a corner of the world, did not have any geographical advantage. Once they became enemies with Feng Zongxi, they would not have to worry about the sects of the Chinese plains, the local government, or even the Ministry of Justice in Great Peace City harboring prejudice against Tai Bai Sword Clan. It was unknown if Chen Tianyuan, who gave people the impression that he was simple-minded, suddenly had a flash of inspiration or something else. This time he actually went straight to the heart of the people and said, "Since my Tai Bai sword sect is a sword sect, we should stand on the sword. Raise your sword and flatten the hills and ravines. Only aim straight for the center." Su Fengnian took a big gulp of wine and smiled. "Well said." Just as Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan were hesitating, the solemn snowhouse spear Saint Li Chongho had already taken off his 2 large and small spear pouches and said indifferently, "The spear is called the Great Snow Cone." Su Fengnian suddenly said to Fan Shaochai in a hurry, "I have to go first. Help me keep an eye on this guy. If you need to, then act. Of course, I'm not asking you to kill him. I'm asking you to help him. If you really can't do it, then tell me your identity." Su Fengnian had just stood up and was about to leave when a clear voice came from far above everyone's heads. "Su!" Su Fengnian had a bitter expression and muttered, "It doesn't make sense. How can you see me from so far away?" Princess Sui Zhu Zhao Fengya, who had already suddenly died of illness, just so happened to be on Mount Wudong, and the little mudman was also there. Even more coincidentally, these 2 princesses had been at loggerheads on the mountain in their early years. Su Fengnian could never have imagined that after entering Beiliang, Zhao Fengya had steeled her heart to live in seclusion on Mount Wudong. Nor could he have imagined that the little mudman was even more determined to take care of the vegetable garden on the mountain. Su Fengnian didn't think that the 2 of them would empathize with each other and would be thanking the gods if they didn't fight. Chen Tianyuan leaned to the side and raised his head. For the first time, he grasped the firewood originally named Careless. He was a natural sword embryo that only appeared once in 100 years. That one was even more so. In Jianghu, when it encountered a great year that only appeared once in 1,000 years, it became unreasonable. Everyone looked up at the sky at the same time. A woman was flying through the air with a box on her back. She broke through the vast sea of clouds from Big Lotus Peak and flew over like an immortal descending to the mortal world. The old people always said that in Jianghu, one had to pay attention to style. With her style, she probably couldn't be any more impressive. A sword immortal of the land, flying 1,000 miles on her sword, traveling to Kunlun in the morning and arriving at the Eastern Sea in the evening. However, this female sword immortal's actions after landing in front of everyone's dumbfounded eyes were even more shocking. She didn't continue to ride her sword back into the box like an immortal. Instead, she held the great Liang dragon sparrow sword and pointed the tip of the sword at a guy who was forcing a smile. She said angrily, "Trying to run?" The guy sat back down on the bench and said confidently, "How is that possible? I was just thinking of bringing you a bottle of green ant wine." She widened her eyes. He stared back at her without showing any signs of fear. Her face was flushed red and she was fuming. They stared at each other. There was a large group of people beside them who were also staring with their eyes wide open. Finally, she glanced at the unopened bottle of green ant wine on the table and said with a straight face, "You can pay the bill yourself." Su Fengnian said with a cheeky smile, "I know that you like to bring money with you when you go out. Lend it to me first and I'll return it to you later." Seeing that she was about to raise her sword and slash him, Su Fengnian immediately lowered his head and took out a money bag. "I clearly remember that I didn't bring any money." Chen Tianyuan saw this scene and felt that this person was really shameless. She snorted heavily and flew back on her sword. She came from the sky and left from the sky. He didn't forget to remind her loudly, "Slow down, the wind is strong." When her figure disappeared into the surging sea of clouds, everyone turned to look at that spineless guy. He slammed the table and said angrily, "What? Is it wrong for a man to love his wife?" Chapter 1878. Jiang Ni's trip back and forth on the sword undoubtedly gave Feng Zongxi and the others a way out. After witnessing the sword style of the young banished immortal, they no longer had the mood to exchange pointers. Feng Zongxi admitted that if they fought in pairs, he would definitely lose to Chen Tianyuan, the rising star of Jianghu. If he joined forces with Lu Jejuan, it would only become a joke. The two of them had lived for more than 90 years. How could they join forces to bully a young junior who had not even reached 30 years of age? If they lost, they would lose their integrity. If they won, it would be dishonorable. It was not worth it. Even the Snow House Spear sage Li Hongho, who had already announced the name of the Great Snow Cone, hesitated for a moment. After glancing at Su Fengnian, he put away the famous spear that was as famous as Wang Xiu's Cha Na and Chen Jibao's plum wine. This grandmaster, who was regarded as extremely powerful in Jianghu of the Central Plains, was originally known for his violent character. However, compared to Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan, these two friends, who were more timid the older they got in Jianghu, Li Hongho had an inexplicable intuition. He was actually not afraid of Chen Tianyuan, who was unparalleled in Jianghu. On the contrary, he was more interested in the young master with the saber who had an average reputation. After entering the mysterious finger realm, one's heart would be connected. One would be able to predict the future. As for Li Hongho, he was a pure martial artist with a body of Vajra. His mysterious finger realm was solid and steady. He took one step at a time. He was the same as the Bailiang sword grandmaster Mi Fengjia, who was not well known in Jianghu. He was far better at predicting the enemy's moves than the Taoist immortals. Chen Tianyuan saw that the Snow House Spear Sage did not have the intention to fight to the death, so he sat back down. His mind was more focused on the woman who was riding the sword. He asked doubtfully, when did Mount Wudong have a female sword immortal who lived in seclusion? Of course, Su Fengnian wouldn't answer this question. There was no need for him to talk too much with a mere acquaintance. Admiring this young banished immortal was one thing, and dealing with him was another. Su Fengnian put away the money pouch, picked up a pot of green ant wine, and threw a look at Fan Shaochai. The latter quietly took out a piece of silver and placed it on the table, ready to follow Su Fengnian up the mountain. The two of them walked towards the two mounts together. Because they were the superior Bailiang warhorses from the Chenli Ranch, they did not need to be tied up, nor would they get lost, let alone be ridden by strangers. Chen Tianyuan hesitated for a moment. Just as he was about to say that they should go together, Fan Shaochai turned his head and shot him a cold glance. The young swordsman, who was confident that he could take on 3 legendary Jianghu figures alone, immediately felt a little discouraged. He sat where he was and drank a mouthful of calming spirit soup, but it was tasteless. Suddenly, someone riding a donkey leisurely came along the post road. Compared to the majestic and dense sound of horse hooves, the sound of the donkey's hooves was somewhat soft and comical. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. He looked at the middle-aged man riding the donkey with a complicated expression. Fan Xiaochai did not know the middle-aged man, but she guessed the identity of the swordsman from the clues on the young lord's face. He rode a donkey, had a sword at his waist, and was able to make Su Fengnian stop and wait. The only swordsman in the world. Unexpectedly, when Chen Tianyuan saw the middle-aged swordsman, his expressionless face blossomed into a look of pleasant surprise. He suddenly stood up and strode forward, before Su Fengnian and Fan Xiaochai. He was extremely excited and said in a trembling voice, "Greetings, master." The middle-aged man jumped off the donkey and said helplessly, "How many times have I told you, I am not your master, and I only have one disciple?" Chen Tianyuan smiled brightly and said, "Whether or not you recognize me as your disciple is your business. Whether or not I recognize you as my master is my business." Chen Tianyuan. The middle-aged man said in a bad mood, "Fortunately, your swordsmanship can be considered a small success. Otherwise, with your stubborn temperament, you would have been beaten until your parents can't recognize you." He led the donkey to Su Fengnian, sized him up, and asked curiously, "Isn't it just a Hong Jingyan? Why is he so miserable?" Su Fengnian said softly, "It's already lucky that he didn't die from Bodhisattva Tuoba's all-out punch. Later on, Chen Jibao found me at Huayang Pass and we had a fight, which slightly delayed my cultivation of qi." The middle-aged man suddenly understood and said, "Oh." This time, it was the arrogant Chen Tianyuan's turn to be stunned. Hong Jingyan, Tuoba, and now Chen Jibao? Su Fengnian thought for a while and decided not to climb the mountain. He led the middle-aged man back to the tea stall and glanced at the sword at his waist. He asked with a smile, "The first time was outside Wu Wu City in the East Sea, the second time was in Dunhuang City in Beimang, and the last time was in Tai'an City. I've seen you 3 times, but I've never seen you with a sword. What happened this time?" Dong Tai said seriously, "It's autumn. Where can I get peach blossoms? Don't tell me there are still peach blossoms blooming in Beiliang?" Su Fengnian sighed. Whether it was the peach blossom sword deity or the banished deity Chen Tianyuan, why did these swordsmen always like to tell such unfunny jokes? Dong Tai patted the sword at his waist and said with a smile, "This is a gift from my disciple to his master. What do you think?" Su Fengnian glanced at the ordinary sword and could only say, "The gift is light but the thought is heavy." Dong Tai shook his head and said, "It's 20 taels of silver. It's not light." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "The Tide Listening Pavilion actually has a few good swords. If you want a newly forged sword, I have some relations with the Yuyan Mountain Villa. Right now, the Dragon Cliff Sword Furnace and the Water Dragon Chant Furnace are also forging swords." Dong Tai waved his hand and interrupted Su Fengnian's good intentions. "What do I want those swords for?" Su Fengnian said with a smile, "I know you definitely don't want them, but I still have to say these words." Dong Tai sneered and said, "You really are Su Zhao's son. It's a pity that you take after Wu Su's appearance." Su Fengnian was somewhat resentful. After sitting down he asked, "Do you want to drink wine or tea?" Dong Tai could drink wine, but he didn't like it. As for tea, he found it even more boring. Since he had come to Beiliang, he did as the Romans did and ordered a pot of green ant wine. When Dong Tai opened the seal, he glanced at Chen Tianyuan and asked casually, "What's with this appearance?" Chen Tianyuan smiled and extended 2 fingers. He gently pulled off the flawless root-like skin, revealing an extremely handsome face. It was not inferior to West Chu's Song Yushu, nor to Beiliang's Yulwan Dao. Su Fengnian finally understood why this guy appreciated him after seeing him. It wasn't just because he was thick-skinned. Su Fengnian asked, "There's a rumor in Jianghu that you taught him swordsmanship. I didn't believe it at first." Dong Tai said indifferently, "It can't be considered teaching swordsmanship. After Li Chungang borrowed my sword, I returned from Beimang and happened to see this person comprehending swordsmanship on a mountaintop in Nanzhao. I gave him a few pointers. Later, after returning from a visit to the Immortals in the East Sea, I came ashore from the Guanyin sect in the South Sea and met him again." Su Fengnian looked deeply at Chen Tianyuan and sighed. No wonder. No wonder Chen Tianyuan could make rapid progress on the path of the sword. Li Chungang didn't want to ascend. After his death, he carried the fate of the path of the sword and naturally scattered to the mortal world. Because the little mudman had the fate of the West Chu dynasty, he couldn't inherit the fate of the Jianghu old man. Presumably, the lucky one was Chen Tianyuan, whom Dong Tai found. Therefore, Su Fengnian blurted out, "Chen Tianyuan, do you want to learn the two-sleeved green snake and the sword opening the gate of heaven?" Chen Tianyuan frowned and shook his head. "Why should I learn it?" Su Fengnian asked in a low voice. "You dare not learn it?" Chen Tianyuan retorted. "Why wouldn't I dare? So what if it's Li Chuangong's famous supreme art? So what if you're Su Fengnian?" Fan Shaochai was somewhat puzzled. In his impression, although this young vassal king was shrewd, he wasn't some wanton, arrogant, and despotic person. As for that banished immortal of the Tai Bai sword sect, no matter what he did, Fan Shaochai wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. But even after seeing Chen Tianyuan's true self, Fan Shaochai still didn't like him from the bottom of his heart. It could even be said that he hated him even more. "You don't need a reason to like me. I don't like you for all kinds of reasons. Love in the world has been bitter since ancient times." Su Fengnian and Chen Tianyuan were at daggers drawn. The latter's sword intent surged like the rising sun, making the tables of people who had thought they would settle things peacefully feel as if they were facing a great enemy. Chen Tianyuan said seriously, "I came to Bailiang to fight you." Dong Tai, who had always stayed out of the affairs of Jianghu, spoke for the first time. "If you can't back down in a fight to the death, then draw your sword. Why draw your sword in a meaningless fight where you're sure to lose?" Chen Tianyuan gripped the hilt of his sword, his expression cold. "He was the one who forced my hand first." Su Fengnian exhaled softly and said mockingly, "If you don't want to learn, then don't. I reckon someone like you won't be able to learn the old man's two-sleeved green snake, even if you wanted to." Chen Tianyuan sneered, "There's no sword move in the world that I, Chen Tianyuan, can't learn." Su Fengnian turned to Fan Shaochai. "Don't you think this guy has a face that deserves a beating?" Fan Shaochai nodded. But she added with great disrespect, "Just like a certain someone." Chapter 1879. Chen Tianyuan felt gratified. Women were indeed more loyal to him. Su Fengnian ignored Fan Shaochai's defiant words and glanced at Chen Tianyuan. "You're so ugly. You're far worse than Li Chungang." Chen Tianyuan sneered. "You're the same." Su Fengnian took a sip of wine and said proudly, "Who's the same as you? Do you have a legitimate wife, Chen Tianyuan?" Chen Tianyuan looked at Fan Shaochai, who was so close but seemed so far away. He looked at the young vassal king and felt a little depressed. For the first time in his life, he wanted to drink to drown his sorrows. Dong Tai poured some green ant wine into his palm and turned around. The old donkey immediately came over and licked the wine. Su Fengnian asked, "Why are you in Bailiang?" Su Fengnian did not think that a Wudong martial art discussion would be able to make this peach blossom sword deity, who was detached from worldly affairs, rush over after hearing the news. Dong Tai said calmly, "I don't care how Liang and Beimang fight. I don't even care how Liang Mang fights to the death." Su Fengnian waited for a long time, but Dong Tai did not give an answer. Dong Tai finally realized that the young vassal king was waiting for him to speak. He clicked his tongue and said, "This green ant wine is really strong. Let me take a break." Then Su Fengnian and Dong Tai raised their heads at the same time, but they raised their heads in opposite directions. In the direction of Escape Summer Town were Chai Qing-shan of the Dongyue Sword Pool and Qi Xianxia of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. At that time, the two grandmasters had secretly gone up the mountain together and temporarily stayed in the newly opened Qingshan Taoist Temple of Wudong. They were not as eye-catching as many Jianghu bigwigs. On the east side of the road, there was a carriage. The old coachman carried a long sword on his back instead of a sword at his waist. Chai Qing-shan and Qi Xianxia came together and were quickly recognized by Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan. Especially Feng Zongxi, who had visited the Dongyue Sword Pool many times and was familiar with the previous sect master, Song Yanqing. However, when facing Song Yanqing, Feng Zongxi, who was only 40 years old, naturally regarded himself as a junior. After Chai Qing-shan entered the Dongyue Sword Pool from the Spring Snow Building's head guest elder, Feng Zongxi was one of the first guests. He had to address Chai Ching-shan as Mr. and was extremely respectful towards this former #1 expert in the southeast of Liang. Lu Jejuan recognized Chai Ching-shan because of the deep relationship between the Misty Peak and the Ministry of Justice. When Chao Chongqing attacked Great Peace City, Lu Jejuan should have fought side by side with Chai Ching-shan. It was only because of his closed-door training that he missed the soul-stirring event. However, Lu Jejuan had been spreading the word in the Jianghu that the Dongyue sword pool was superior to the Wu family's sword tomb in terms of both its heritage and the way of the sword. Therefore, when Chai Ching-shan appeared, Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan quickly stood up with respectful expressions. Dou Chongfeng and the other disciples of the Misty Peak did not dare to sit down, just like the officials of the local government meeting the Purple Emperor. Chai Ching-shan was not the kind of martial arts master who kept people at arm's length. In the face of Feng and Lu's eagerness, he greeted them politely and introduced Qi Xianxia, who was his friend despite their age difference. Qi Xianxia's expression was warm and genial. He was originally waiting at the foot of the mountain for Mr. White Lotus, who was also from the Dragon and Tiger sect. He only came here with Chai Ching-shan after sensing the dense sword aura. At this moment, the 4 grandmasters of the martial arts evaluation included Su Fengnian and Dong Tai. The 4 grandmasters of the new martial arts evaluation also included Chen Tianyuan and Qi Xianxia. At the same time, the masters of the Dongyue sword pool and the Wu family sword tomb had also arrived. Chai Ching-shan, Wu Jian. The carriage stopped at the side of the road and Wu Jian got off slowly. Dong Tai, who had his back to the old man, snorted. He was the peach blossom sword god who appeared out of nowhere, but he did not like the sword tomb at all. In the 100 years of Jianghu, only 3 people were able to walk out of the Wu family's sword tomb. The first was Li Chun-gang, who swaggered away with the wooden bull. Then the previous generation's sword crown, Wu Su, broke off all ties with the Wu family. Finally, Dong Tai left with an invincible aura. The old man sat on the bench next to Su Fengnian and said with a smile, "Little Tai, how many years has it been since we last met?" Dong Tai lowered his head and drank with a straight face. He was unwilling to talk. Su Fengnian looked at this elder from his mother's family. He wanted to say something but hesitated. He felt strange. The old man stretched out his withered hand and patted the back of Su Fengnian's hand. Then he smiled amiably at Dong Tai and said, "We were born in different ancestral halls. Indeed, the Wu family has wronged you first. When you left home, you said that you would never share the same grave. Do you really want to do that?" Dong Tai sneered and said, "What, does the Wu family sword tomb need an outsider with the surname Deng to hold up its face?" The old man chuckled and said, "If you are willing to acknowledge your ancestors, that is also possible." Dong Tai was on the verge of swearing. Fortunately, he swallowed it back down and took a big gulp of wine. The old man's eyes seemed to be in a trance. At the peak of the Wu family sword mountain, there were once 4 swords: Wooden Bull, Tai Yi, Great Liang Dragon Sparrow, and Heart. The old man took the wine bowl that Su Fengnian handed over. He lowered his head and took a sip. Then, he looked at Wudong Mountain and said, "Wooden Bull was taken away by Li Chun-gang. It is broken. Fortunately, the Great Liang Dragon Sparrow that little Su took away is still intact and has an heir. The Su of Gojoseon's sword was originally my sword. Later on, I borrowed the hands of Lu Ding to give it to that child, Cui Hua. Only the ancient sword Heart did not recognize an owner. Until today, it is still stuck at the peak of the sword mountain." Not only did Su Fengnian, Dong Tai, and Chai Ching-shan, the sword Dao grandmaster, even Lu Jejuan and Feng Zongxi heard the sound of a sword in the distance. It was obvious that there was definitely a peerless sword hidden in a box nearby. Moreover, it was trembling non-stop. Dong Tai's expression was cold and indifferent. The old man sighed and did not continue to persuade Dong Tai. Dong Tai put down the wine pot and said, "Wu Su saved my life at the Sword Mountain. I have already repaid the debt by saving Su Fengnian's life at the Eastern Sea's martial emperor city. Wu Su imparted the Wu clan's sword arts to me. I have also given the 12 flying swords to Su Fengnian. We are even." The old man seemed to be a little tired. "Whatever you say. I just feel sorry for the Taiya sword. Isn't it also an abandoned child?" Dong Tai finally raised his head and looked at the old man for the first time. When he was still a child, he lived alone on the sword mountain that was as silent as hell. Only when he was hungry would he go down the mountain to look for food. Otherwise, He would stay in the 10,000 sword forest and let the dense sword chi invade his body. He would faint and wake up again and again. That kind of pain was deep. It was bone deep. During those years, only 2 people climbed the sword mountain. Su Fengnian's mother, Wu Su, taught him the most basic sword arts in various ways. The other person was the old man in front of him. He once carried the unconscious youth to the top of the sword mountain and looked down at the sword mound. It was only until the day he left the sword mound that Dong Tai knew the identity of the strange old man. The sword hummed loudly. It was like a woman covering her mouth and sobbing non-stop. It was as if she was crying and complaining. It almost pierced the eardrums. Other than the old man, Su Fengnian, Dong Tai and Chai Qing-shan, even Chen Tianyuan, Qi Xianxia and Li Hozhong frowned. Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan circulated their qi continuously to resist the soul-stirring shapeless sword qi. Do Chongfeng and the others covered their ears with all their might. On the other hand, the owner of the tea stall was an ordinary person. He only felt that the sound was a little noisy, but he was not hurt at all. The old man did not turn his head. He only pointed his finger in the direction of the carriage. In more than 30 years, that sword flew out of the sword mountain on its own 3 times. The first time was when you left the Wu family and it was forced to stay. The second time was when you went to the East Sea Martial Emperor city to challenge Wang Xianji. The third time was when you fought to the death with Tuoba in Beimang. In Great Peace City, when you fought with Su Fengnian, Chao Chongqing and the other 2, it did not leave the sword mound. It only wailed at the same place. It probably felt that its master would never be able to hold it in his hands in this lifetime. Since ancient times, all treasures that have been passed down have spirits. I believe that there are very few as pitiful as the Tai sword. Su Fengnian suddenly said self-deprecatingly, as one of the 4 great grandmasters of martial arts, when I returned to my peak after Chao Chongqing's death, Tuoba would not be able to advance any further. I thought that I was the closest to being the strongest in the world. The old man looked at Su Fengnian and Dong Tai. He laughed and said, in any case it's the same. Dong Tai sighed heavily. Su Fengnian couldn't help but tease. Old Deng, aren't you being pretentious? The old man nodded in agreement and said, yes. Dong Tai's expression was lonely. The old man stopped joking and said in a low voice, don't forget, your ancestor Dong Tai was one of the 9 people of the Wu family who defeated the cavalry of Beimang. He was also the person who controlled the sword formation. Dong Tai took a deep breath and looked at Su Fengnian. Outside the pass to the north of Beimang City, give me 10,000 Beimang cavalry. Su Fengnian smiled and said, 10,000 is too little. 20,000 is too much. The old man jerked his lips and said to himself, as expected, he is the same as Su Shao. Dong Tai suddenly raised his arm. A white streak of light flew over. Dong Tai held the Tai sword. Sword energy filled the world. Chapter 1880. There was an irrigation ditch on the outskirts of Iha City in Yuzhou. In autumn, the reeds were covered in a vast expanse of snow. Several riverside villages were scattered among them. A carriage turned from the official road to a small road. The coachman was a young man in strange clothes with a dull expression. Behind the coachman sat a man in plain cotton-padded clothes. He leaned against the wall of the carriage with his legs dangling outside, gently swaying with the carriage. On the small road in the evening, the carriage caught up with an old farmer who had just finished his work. When the carriage passed by the old farmer, the man in cotton-padded clothes turned to look at the old man who was looking at him curiously. The old man had a very ugly face. Although he was hunched, he was still half a head taller than the old people in the south. His footsteps were also quite vigorous. It was obvious that the old man must have been a good fighter when he was young. The man in cotton-padded clothes softly called for Mr. The coachman pulled the reins and the carriage slowly stopped. The man jumped off the carriage and greeted with a smile, "Fourth Grandpa." The old farmer's face was full of astonishment. He did not know why this unfamiliar junior called him Fourth Grandpa. It was probably because he was intimidated by the cotton-clothed man's imposing manner that the old farmer stammered uneasily and did not dare to speak. The man in cotton-padded clothes smiled with the most authentic Yuzhou accent. "I am Chen Wang from the end of the village." "Fourth Grandpa, don't you recognize me?" The old farmer widened his eyes and looked at the young man who claimed to live at the end of the village. Then, he suddenly realized and a smile bloomed on his wrinkled face. "Little Wang?" Chen Wang grinned and said, "Yes." The old man sighed and then wondered, "Why did you come back?" Didn't you go to the capital to take the exam? Chen Wang smiled and said, I finished the exam long ago. This time, I went home to take a look. Fourth grandpa lent me 2 taels of silver. I dare not forget. The old man waved his hand and asked curiously, How did you do? Chen Wang said softly, Not bad. The old man said, Oh. Perhaps he was afraid of hurting the young man's face, so he did not get to the bottom of it. Moreover, the old man who had been dealing with the yellow soil all his life could not get an answer. He just sighed. What a pity. Chen Wang's expression was calm, as if he did not understand the regret in the old man's words. Chen Wang and the old farmer walked back to the village side by side. They talked about this year's harvest, the marriages of their peers, and whether the elders in the village were still alive. Through chatting, Chen Wang learned that his yellow mud house had long been dilapidated. One of the walls had collapsed. This was within reason. He hadn't returned to his hometown for 10 years. How could an extremely simple house be safe and sound? Chen Wang's parents had passed away one after another before he went to take the exam. An ownerless house was not like those weak reeds that would flourish in the spring, even if they withered in the autumn. There were some things that the old farmer didn't say. In fact, after this young man came to the capital, there was a woman in the village who would often clean up. She kept the village as clean as her own home. Year after year, many of the young men who secretly admired her gave up and got married and had children. Gradually, the virgin girl became an old woman. But now that she was no longer here, what was the use of saying these things to Chen Wang? Moreover, Chen Wang had stayed in the capital for so many years. Perhaps he didn't remember her? Otherwise, if he really cared, why didn't he send a letter back even if he couldn't return home for so many years? When they were close to the entrance of the village, the old man raised his head to look at the village with smoke rising in spirals. He couldn't help but sigh. That girl's home was at the entrance of the village. What a virtuous child. Everyone within 100 li would give her a thumbs up. In the early years, the matchmaker almost broke the threshold of her home, but she didn't agree. Her parents couldn't do anything about it. No one expected that in the end, such a tragedy would happen. The common people all accepted their fate. If their fate was bad, they couldn't blame anyone. This was like getting an illness. If they could get through it, they could live. If they couldn't, then it was because the heavens didn't reward them with food. They could only be buried in peace. Chen Wang didn't enter the village. He suddenly stopped and asked, Fourth grandfather, where is her grave? The old man was stunned. He lowered his voice and said, How do you know she? The old man didn't continue speaking. Chen Wang also didn't speak. The old man pointed in the direction of the ferry and said, Over there. The grave mound is small, but easy to find. Chen Wang took out a heavy money pouch and a letter. Fourth grandfather, please help me pay off the village's debt. Give it to Li Zhang or the teacher from the nearby private school. It's written clearly on there. The old man hesitated but didn't refuse in the end. He carefully took the letter and money pouch and asked, Are you not going back to the village to take a look? Chen Wang shook his head and said, I won't go. After visiting my parents' graves, I need to immediately return to Jing. The old man sighed emotionally. You're in too much of a rush. Chen Wang smiled. The old man had just walked a few steps when he suddenly turned back and asked, Little Wang, you're really a high-ranking official in Jing? Chen Wang didn't seem to know how to answer. A high-ranking official in Great Peace City? High-ranking official Huang Zi, in the center of power, a ruler of a dynasty? So he could only smile and say, It's not that big. The old man said with relief, Then it's very good. Fourth grandfather knew a long time ago that you wouldn't be bad. Chen Wang's smile was light. The old man didn't forget to glance at the young person standing next to Chen Wang. When he turned and left, he was full of suspicion. That person's clothing was very strange. Chen Wang and the young eunuch of the same age as the country slowly walked forward. His parents' graves were not far from the village. Chen Wang raised his hand and brushed the reeds. When he had studied hard, he didn't even dare to think about becoming a grand scholar or getting a place in the imperial exam. His parents didn't have such hopes. They only felt that their son being able to read and write was a good thing to bring glory to their family. Bailiang was very cold. It was very good if each family could produce a scholar. It was very different from the Central Plains, especially the rich Jiangnan. That place was very particular about passing down the family through farming and studying. In Bailiang, it was common for young people to join the army, but it was rare to find someone with a book in their hands. When he had just entered the capital to participate in the imperial examination, Bailiang was the only one that had not set up an examination hall in Great Peace City. He was unfamiliar with the place and did not have the care of the seniors from his hometown in the imperial examination. He could only stay in a small temple. Bailiang's accent caused him to run into resistance everywhere. The same ancient book was sold to him at a much higher price. Even after he had participated in the court examination, he still did not have any friendships in his generation. Bailiang was the only one. Jean Lanting's meteoric rise in Great Peace City and Yen Jeshi's rise to become a relative of the imperial family were due to personal grievances and did not change this. Even though Yao Baifeng was the left chancellor of the Imperial College, he did not have the ability to change this. And he, Chen Wang, the Chen Xiaobao in the eyes of all the civil and military officials, was the left scattered cavalry of the province, and the future Grand Secretary that the Emperor relied on the most. He had the heart and the power, but he could not do it. Chen Wang walked slowly. On his two sides were reeds that were taller than a person's head. The large and soft reed flowers were blown up by the autumn wind and landed somewhere unknown. Chen Wang arrived at the grave mound and pulled out the messy weeds. Then, he straightened his clothes and knelt down to kowtow 3 times. The son wanted to take care of his parents, but the parents did not wait. The old man that this cotton-clothed man respectfully called fourth great-grandfather probably did not know in his life that the 2 items that the junior had handed to him, the money pouch and the letter, were worth thousands of gold just from the 2 words, Chen Wang at the end. In the 20 years of Bailiang's history, there were only a few people in the Liang officialdom. Among them, Jean Lanting was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yen Jeshi was a scholar, and the Confucian scholar Yao Baifeng was in charge of the Imperial College. However, even if the 3 of them were added together, they might not be as important as Chen Wang. It could even be said that in a large sense, it was this scholar from Bailiang who had left his hometown. His 2 secret letters changed the structure of Bailiang. On the way back, Chen Wang met a sturdy man of the same age. After seeing him, the man's expression was complicated. There was resentment, reverence, surprise, and confusion. The man took a deep breath and handed Chen Wang a coarse cloth bag with a straight face. "These are the things my sister left behind. They are the books you left behind. I'm returning them to you." Chen Wang took the cloth bag and was lost in thought. The man turned around and strode away. He stopped and said with a hoarse voice, "Wang, although my sister, don't think that she died in a dubious way. She's cleaner than anyone else." Chen Wang covered his mouth and looked at the back of the man who used to put his arm around his shoulder and call him brother-in-law. He said vaguely, "I'm sorry." The man muttered, "You can say that to her." Chen Wang was silent. Blood seeped out between his fingers. He did not move for a long time. Chen Wang carried the cloth bag to the ferry and found the small grave. The eunuch was nowhere to be found. Chen Wang sat cross-legged in front of the grave. He sat across from the small grave. There was an illiterate woman who would find a clean place under the sun to dry her books. She would open them one by one and put them away one by one. There was an unmarried woman who would go to the small ferry when no one was around. She would look into the distance again and turn around again and again. Chen Wang gently opened the cloth bag and looked down. There were familiar books such as The Book of Rights and The Great Learning. There were also older books such as 3,000 Books of Elementary Learning. Back then, when they were working in the fields, washing clothes at the ferry, picking reeds during the heavy snow, he would often recite to her. 10 years had passed between this year and that year. He and she were separated by yin and yang. Chen Wang closed his eyes and read softly. "The country is in trouble. The king dies in the country. The doctor dies in the ancestral temple. The people die in the countryside," the gentleman said. "Great virtue is not an official, great Tao is not a tool. Great faith is not agreed, and great time is not uniform. Those who observe these 4 can aspire to learn. Let the people of the world be united in worship and worship. As if on top of it, as if on the left and right of it." In the twilight, the scholar was reading. The reeds swayed gently in the wind. It was like a woman nodding her head and smiling like a flower. Chapter 1881. The 3 riders and 1 donkey circled around Fuxia town and came to the memorial arch at the foot of Mount Wudong. Su Fengnian, Fan Shaochai, and Chen Tianyuan dismounted together. Dong Tai patted the old donkey's back after landing and started chanting. Chen Tianyuan looked up at the words, Wudong Dang Xing, written by ancestor Lu himself. He did not look like an ordinary swordsman but was full of spirit and fighting spirit. Su Fengnian suddenly turned to Fan Shaochai and said, Go to the southeast of Liang. If you can find that guy in 2 years, help me pass a message to him. Tell him that he has to pay back the money he owed me. Fan Shaochai frowned and said, According to the spies of Fu Shui Room, the villages and towns there are scattered all over the place. It's not easy to find him with the scattered clues from before. Su Fengnian nodded and said, Finding a needle in a haystack depends on fate. Just think of it as doing your best. I don't expect you to find that guy. Fan Shaochai asked with a straight face, Can you change the spy? I'm good at killing and only killing. There are many people in Fu Shui Room who are more suitable for finding people. Su Fengnian smiled and said, No. There was a hint of anger in Fan Shaochai's eyes. It swayed like water plants in her limpid eyes. She was angry but did not dare to say anything. Su Fengnian teased, Maybe in less than 2 years, you'll hear the news of my death. Won't that save you a lot of trouble? Fan Shaochai said stiffly, The happiest thing in the world is cutting off the head of one's enemy with one's own hands. Su Fengnian sighed and said helplessly, You only dare to show your true feelings in front of me. If Lu Qiuer was here, would you have the courage? Fan Shaochai smiled sweetly and asked, Is Chu Lushan here? Su Fengnian said unhappily, That's why I said that evil people can only be dealt with by evil people. Fan Shaochai took a deep look at the young lord and mounted his horse again. After a moment of hesitation, he reached for the hilt of the saber at his waist. This pawn of crossing the river? Su Fengnian smiled and said, It's just a temporary loan. You still have to return it. Fan Shaochai sped away on his horse. Chen Tianyuan had been immersed in the magnificent sword intent of Ancestor Lu's 4 words. He was awakened by the sound of horse hooves gradually fading away. He asked doubtfully, Why did she leave? Su Fengnian said indifferently, I sent her to the Central Plains to do something. Oh, Chen Tianyuan replied. He waited until the woman and her horse had completely disappeared from his sight before he mounted his horse and looked in the direction of her disappearing figure. His heroic spirit overflowed as he laughed heartily. May the world know of my sword, there are only 3. Qing Shan, Qing Shui, and Fan Shaochai. Su Fengnian sneered, If you have the ability, say that to her yourself. After Chen Tianyuan mounted the horse, he slightly straightened the famed sword at his waist. Why should I say such annoying words? Su Fengnian said, But you're half-master and I don't like to hear them either. After Chen Tianyuan covered his face with the raw skin, he spat out, What does it have to do with me? And galloped away. Dong Tai smiled. I'm fine with it. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes. I really can't stand this young banished immortal's temper. Dong Tai sighed with emotion for no reason. Perhaps when Li Chungang first came out, he was also this annoying. As far as I know, the heroines and fairies of Jianghu just happened to fall for this. Su Fengnian grimaced and said resentfully, That can't be right. Dong Tai dismissed it with a laugh. Su Fengnian sighed heavily and muttered, Right now, I'm a little depressed. Dong Tai asked, Are you waiting for someone? Su Fengnian sighed and said, Although Song Yanqing once tried to kill me with the 14 new swords, it didn't stop me from having a good impression of the Dongyue sword pool. As for Chai Qing Shan, who took over the sword pool, it can be said that an exchange of blows leads to friendship. There are people in Jianghu who can't be hated, whether they're friends or foes. Chai Qing Shan Wang Mingyin outside Xiangfan City is the same, and Catman Han Shangxian outside Shenwu City is the same. Dong Tai was silent. The ancestor of the Wu family sword tomb, who had a deep relationship with him and the young king, returned to the Central Plains after delivering the swords. It seemed that he had completely retired from Jianghu. Dong Tai seemed to realize something and asked curiously, Why did you let that woman leave Bailiang at this time? Did you hope that she could take Chen Tianyuan to the Central Plains? Su Fengnian smiled and said, The main thing was to find her, and at the same time take away that eyesore banished immortal, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The young king held the hilt of his sword and stood under the archway. The breeze brushed his face, making him look like an immortal. The peach blossom sword deity stood side by side with him and looked into the distance with a sword hanging from his waist. He was the #1 sword deity in the world. Su Fengnian asked softly, the old man with the sheep fur coat, old monster Wang, and Chao Chongqing, they all left their fates in the human world. Old Huang also left a sword manual for me. Dong Tai, what about you? The peach blossom sword deity, who entered Taoism through swordsmanship and stood shoulder to shoulder with ancestor Lu and Li Chun Gang at the top of the sword forest, said calmly, I, Dong Tai, don't want to die. Su Fengnian said enviously, you're so cool. Dong Tai saw Chai Ching Shan and the others coming slowly from afar. Obviously, he had no intention of accompanying Su Fengnian. He turned around and led the donkey up the mountain. Chai Ching Shan and Qi Xianxia walked together. The divine fist of the Central Plains, Feng Zongxi, and the fairies of the Piaomiao Peak also joined in the fun. However, the snow hut spear Saint Li Vongho and his disciples did not appear. Su Fengnian's left shoulder was suddenly patted heavily. He turned around and saw no one. He turned to the other side and still saw no one. Su Fengnian pretended to be surprised. Soon, a little girl who was squatting on the ground jumped up and laughed. Are you scared? Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and smiled. The corners of his mouth curled up and his smile was especially gentle. Every time he saw her, from the first meeting to the second meeting, he only felt happy. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and rubbed her hair. Oh, you've grown taller. She put her hands on her hips and raised her chin high. She puffed out her chest and did not hide her pride. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, where are the little monks Nanbei and Nanbei? She rolled her eyes and said, stupid Nanbei. He's talking to a little Taoist boy called Yu Fu. I don't want to play with them. You don't know. A little bald head and a little scholar. When these two are together, they like to talk to each other. It's even more boring than when those big old bald heads at home gather together to talk about scriptures and quarrel. Then what about your parents? I'm so worried. Not long ago, there was a female pilgrim from Jiangnan on the mountain. I don't know how she recognized my father. She cried so hard. My mother was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. My father took the initiative to wash his clothes for several days, but it was no use. Yesterday, he even borrowed some copper coins from the old Taoist of Wudong Mountain, saying that he would let my mother go down the mountain to buy some rouge and face powder. And your mother didn't agree? How could that be? It's not like you don't know that my mother will compete with anyone, but not with rouge and face powder. When she got the money, she went down the mountain to the town at the foot of the mountain. When she returned to the mountain, she fiddled with her clothes for almost 2 hours before she was willing to see anyone. Was your father scared? Nonsense. My father kept saying that my mother was as beautiful as a fairy. Unfortunately, when my mother finally calmed down, the female pilgrim used the excuse of leaving to find my parents. After seeing my mother's makeup, the woman didn't say anything. She just glanced at my mother from the corner of her eyes, and then the corners of her mouth curled up. In the end, she ignored my mother and only cared about politely greeting my father. When she left, I saw her quite clearly. She secretly curled her lips at my mother. In this way there was no and then. Lizzie, your mother has met her match. I didn't think so at the time, but now that I think about it, it really was quite hurtful. Actually, it's my fault. When my mother was fiercely applying rouge and face powder, I didn't pay much attention. Otherwise, my mother would definitely look better. It's fine. As long as your father thinks your mother looks good, it's fine. That's true, but he has a disciple called Nan Bei. At that time, my father really had no other choice, so he asked, Nan Bei, do you also think that your master's wife is the most beautiful woman in the world? Guess what, Nan Bei replied. Master, you said that monks don't lie. After that, my mother pulled my father's ear, and my father pulled Nan Bei's ear. These 3 are really too much. They're like children who can't grow up. It makes me very worried. Su Fengnian, why don't you take me to Mount Qingliang to play? Liangzhou City's meat buns are delicious, but they're a bit expensive. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the girl with her head tilted. He didn't want to disappoint her, so he bent his finger and lightly tapped her forehead. You can go to Mount Qingliang to play, but you have to get your parents' permission. She nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice. Then she tugged on Su Fengnian's sleeve and said in a low voice, When you get to the mountains, see my father. Remember, if you see my father turn around and go back to his room, immediately run away." Su Fengnian was confused. The girl said embarrassedly, "These past few years, my father has liked to sharpen his knife when he has nothing to do." Su Fengnian was speechless. Chapter 1882. At this time, Chai Ching-shan and his party were approaching the archway. Chai Ching-shan was standing under the steps. The old man nodded to greet him. Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan, the two famous Jianghu bigwigs, were actually rising stars, compared to Chai Ching-shan, a martial arts grandmaster who was truly famous in the imperial court. At this time, the two of them respectfully cupped their fists and saluted to the young lord, loudly announcing their names. Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and said with a chuckle, "This king is only a pilgrim of Wudong Mountain today. You don't have to be so polite." The Li Thing secretly made a face. Su Fengnian smiled. She coughed lightly and winked at him. Su Fengnian held back his laughter and said seriously, "Let me introduce you. This is Miss Li. She is the most chivalrous and righteous. She is also good at martial arts. People call her." Su Fengnian paused for a moment and quickly turned his head to look at her and winked at her. Back then, when they were roaming Jianghu together, one of their favorite things was to give themselves nicknames. At that time, except for Huang, the other three fledgling Jianghu birds were all short-sighted. The only nicknames they could come up with were probably Feng Zongxi's Divine Fist of the Central Plains. They could come up with anything to scare people, and the bolder it sounded, the better. That year, Miss Li Zi, who ran away from home, gave herself no less than 20 nicknames. She even lectured Su Fengnian and the guy with the wooden sword. We Wulin heroes can only give wrong names, but not wrong nicknames. Therefore, people in Jianghu must be very careful when dealing with nicknames. After Su Fengnian read her lips clearly, he continued without leaving a trace. "Jianghu people call you Fairy Tongxian. It's only because Miss Li is proficient in all of the sabers, swords, spears and staffs that you're proficient in, that you're able to form your own sect." The girl didn't care about the posture of a heroine and hurriedly reminded, "My Qinggong, don't forget to tell me about it." Su Fengnian could only obediently fill in the gaps and said, "Fairy Li's Qinggong is also very good. It can be said that you are unparalleled in Jianghu." Feng Zongxi and Lu Jejuan, who were experienced in Jianghu, had sharp eyes. Although they didn't know what the young king was singing, they still did a full set of Jianghu etiquette with the girl. After a full set of etiquette, she, who was addicted to being a heroine, was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth. Suddenly she whispered, "Su Fengnian, do you still remember our agreement?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. "Living if you can lie, never stand. Jianghu if you can fly, you." She patted Su Fengnian's shoulder rudely. "This king will go first. This king will Jianghu. To everyone. To go. To go Jianghu head." Then, he crouched down and carried her on his back. His figure flew up like a rainbow. The two of them arrived at the top of Big Lotus Peak. Su Fengnian still carried the heroine on his back, just like when she was tired and wanted him to carry her. She leaned on his back and whispered, "Su Fengnian, you have always treated me as a sister, right?" Su Fengnian nodded. She suddenly smiled. "It's okay." Su Fengnian turned his head slightly and said with a bitter face, "You hurt my feelings." She bumped her forehead against his. Su Fengnian turned his head again, full of smiles. She hugged his neck and carefully asked, "Su Fengnian, if I take stupid Nanbei and leave Bailiang, will you be angry?" Su Fengnian shook his head. "Of course not. You are a heroine who roams Jianghu. Nanbei is a monk who chants Buddhist scriptures. Why should you get involved?" She sniffled. Su Fengnian comforted her, "I will definitely find you in the future." She didn't say anything. Between the mountains and rivers, the girl's thoughts were better than all the poems. Near the girl's house was a hastily built thatched cottage. A white-robed monk who was originally sitting on a stool in front of the house sighed. When he saw this scene, the middle-aged monk who was washing his wife's clothes did not bother with the washboard. He suddenly stood up and strode towards the simple thatched cottage. Li Donghai quickly jumped off his back and shouted at Su Fengnian, "The situation is tense. Let's go." Su Fengnian didn't say anything and immediately ran away. The white-robed monk quickly rushed out of the house with a kitchen knife in hand. He looked around with a murderous look. This murderous look was probably not inferior to Dong Tai's Taiya sword at the foot of the mountain. One must know that in the past, Chao Chongqing's heavenly image state was the most outstanding, Dong Tai's finger mystery sword was the most powerful, and finally, Li Dongxin's Vajra state of the two Zen temples was the most invincible. Li Dongxin's aura was like a Buddha lying down, sitting, and standing. There were only two people in the world who weren't afraid of Li Dongxin: his wife and daughter. The girl happened to be one of them, so she didn't care about her father. She put her hands behind her back, hummed a tune, and leisurely strolled elsewhere. This daughter who didn't know how to love her father. The white-robed monk sighed heavily, put down the kitchen knife, sat back on the stool, and continued to wash clothes. When the little monk Nanbei returned to the thatched cottage, he heard his master talking to himself. The little monk moved a stool and sat down, asking, "Master, are you reciting scriptures?" "You can say that. It's just a little difficult. Every household, temple has its own difficult scriptures." "Master, but the old abbot said that scriptures are the easiest to recite in the world." "That's why the abbot is the abbot. You can only be the disciple of the abbot's disciple." "Sigh, master, what if I can't find a disciple in the future? If our temple wasn't sealed off, it would be simple. Find a dark and windy day. Master will bring you a big sack and catch a little bald head. Now, it's difficult." "Master, my disciple is far worse than the old abbot's disciple." "Master, just say that I'm not as good as you." "That won't do. How can there be such a shameless master?" "Master, today, Yu Fu helped someone read their fortune and wrote a letter to their family. The two elders insisted on giving Yu Fu money. Yu Fu couldn't refuse them no matter how hard he tried. Yu Fu knew that us master and disciple need to spend money frequently, so he gave the money to disciple. Disciple will return the money to him now." "Nanbei, master is actually very proud to have a disciple like you." "Master, I'll definitely give this money to master's wife." "All right, where is master's wife?" "Your master's wife, sleeping." Everyone loves to sleep, but there are very few people who understand the samadhi. Otherwise, why would the ancients say, sleeping together is the most virtuous? Your master's wife is even better than master." "Master, I only know that master's wife snoring is very powerful. Master can sleep better than anyone else. You're even more powerful." "Stupid Nanbei, you've improved." The two bald heads, one big and one small, touched their bald heads almost at the same time. The white-robed monk touched his head and looked into the distance. He said softly, "The black hair on your master's wife's head is the temple in master's heart. The wrinkles at the corner of her eyes are the scriptures that master never gets tired of looking at. Her snoring is the dharma that master never gets tired of hearing." The little monk was dumbfounded. He didn't know why his master suddenly became so poetic. Then, he heard his master's wife snort softly behind them. She laughed and scolded, "Damn it!" The little monk turned his head and glanced at his master's wife, who was walking back into the house. He then looked at his master's serene face and sighed, "Master." The white-robed monk didn't look back. He lowered his head and washed his clothes. He said softly, "Your master's wife thinks that she doesn't look good with rouge. She just wants to hear master say that she looks good. But she doesn't know that in master's eyes, she's always so beautiful." The little monk stammered, Master's wife has already gone far." The white-robed monk murmured, "Is peace and quiet far away?" "Not far." "Is the city far away?" "Not far." "Is life and death far away?" "Not far." "Then master's wife and master will naturally be very close." The little monk was confused. He said with heartfelt admiration, "Master, you really have the root of wisdom." The white-robed monk tipped a chestnut on his stupid disciple's bald head. "You're asking for a beating. How can a disciple praise his master for having the root of wisdom?" The little monk looked innocent. The middle-aged monk with his back to the cottage lowered his voice. "Has your master's wife really gone far?" The little monk turned his head and looked back in an instant. Obviously, he was already very familiar with this action. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "Master's wife has closed the door." The middle-aged monk said, "Oh." The little monk sighed and moved the bucket and washboard. The white-robed monk smiled and praised, "Disciple, you also have the root of wisdom." The little monk didn't say anything. The white-robed monk folded his hands on his knees and leaned back a little. He looked up at the sky. This poor monk has comprehended all the scriptures and dharma in the world. This poor monk has seen all the beautiful scenes in the world. Only that face that is often covered with thick rouge can never be enough. The white-robed monk smiled and touched his head. You've become a Buddha. Chapter 1883. If one stood at the top of the big lotus peak and looked down, the two mountain paths in the north and south were like two dragons lying majestically on Mount Wudong. As a famous scenic spot on Mount Wudong, the elephant pool was even more crowded. Family members and visitors lingered here, forgetting to go home. There was a Jianghu man with a loud voice standing on the bluestone beside the pool, talking loudly about the various wonders and anecdotes of the elephant pool. He said that the Wudong senior sword maniac Wang Xiaoping had once secluded himself to comprehend the sword here, which led to the soul-stirring battle with Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city. He also said that the current Prince Liang had practiced his blade here for many years. Before he left the mountain, he was able to force the waterfall to reverse its flow with one strike, which was so powerful that it could reach as far as 10 miles away. The young men and women who listened were all swayed. They were still inexperienced but still looked forward to the young heroes of Jianghu. Everyone was overwhelmed with emotion, as if they had personally witnessed the peerless demeanor of the young martial arts master. There was a pavilion near the elephant pool. Between the elephant pool and the pavilion, there were many stalls selling incense and candles, fortune-telling for people, and all kinds of clever items. There were even hawkers who cooked on the spot, selling Wudong sesame seed cakes, Taoist stir-fried vegetables, calming soup, and so on. A young man with a bucket on his shoulder stood dumbfounded outside the dense crowd. If he wanted to carry 2 buckets of water, wouldn't he have to fight his way out? He could only follow a deep bluestone path back to the cottage where the mistress was temporarily missing. He put down his shoulder and bucket, took a gourd ladle and bent down to scoop up a ladle of water from the bottom of the water tank. He slowly walked to the vegetable garden and leisurely watered it. After autumn, the greenery of the vegetable garden was not as rich as in spring and summer. It looked a little lonely. He finally squatted at the edge of the vegetable garden with the gourd ladle and wandered thousands of miles. The peach blossom sword deity stood up and walked toward the hut after sensing a familiar aura. He saw Dong Tai, who was leading the donkey, standing outside the short bamboo fence. The peach blossom sword deity didn't push the donkey away until he saw its owner. He fastened the reins and sat down on the small bamboo chair the young man brought over, his buttocks cold. Because Su Fengnian was carrying Li Ti on his back, he was able to reach the summit earlier than Dong Tai. Have you been to LV Zuding? He asked with a smile. Dong Tai nodded. If it wasn't for that tablet, I wouldn't have recognized it. Su Fengnian asked again, how's the calligraphy? Dong Tai said indifferently, boring. Su Fengnian said with a clear conscience, when I left the mountain, I wasn't even in the first rank. It's normal for me to be lacking in spirit. It turned out that the simple LV Zuding was built 700 years ago. According to the records of the county, before the young LV Zuding made Mount Wudong a place of cultivation, he climbed the mountain alone with a sword. When he was halfway up the mountain, he looked into the distance. An old man holding a walking stick appeared and asked LV Zuding, who was not famous at the time, about the way of immortality. LV Zuding gave him a prophecy and helped him to attain immortality. In the end, there was a poem that spread widely. It was said that it was written by LV Zuding. Walking alone, sitting alone, I don't know the world. Only the old locust spirit knows that the immortals have passed. The poem was carved on an ancient tablet by the Wudong Taoists, but the writing was eroded by time. Before Su Fengnian went down the mountain to practice his saber, a young martial granduncle riding a bull was pushed out by his senior brother. He asked Su Fengnian for the tablet inscription that was changed to cursive. Dong Tai looked around, happy and content. Su Fengnian joked, there are so many martial arts masters on Mount Wudong now. Just in Nanjiang, there's the master saber master Mao Shulang, Chang Baishuang, who's trying to become the scholarly sage, Ji Luan, and Wei Miao and Xue Songguan in Shu and Zhao. Dong Tai's words were shocking. When I was climbing the mountain just now, I saw Gu Jiantang, and then I saw Shenyuan Qingfeng in the LV Zuding. Su Fengnian frowned. It's not strange that I didn't notice Gu Jiantang climbing the mountain, but Shenyuan Qingfeng was close at hand. Dong Tai hit the nail on the head. During the battle outside Great Peace City, Chao Chongqing seemed to favor this woman who blocked the way. Shenyuan Qingfeng benefited greatly from this, and now he's only a step away. Su Fengnian sighed. So that's how it is. The opportunities of this woman in charge of the Great Snow Plains can't be explained with common sense. Lu Songtao, Zhao Huangchao, Wang Xianji, and Chao Chongqing, they either taught her everything or enlightened her. In the end, she became one of the few masters in the world. Dong Tai said with a bit of sarcasm, "You missed out on the most important person, didn't you?" Su Fengnian's face was immediately filled with embarrassment. Dong Tai suddenly asked, "Do you need me to help you block Gu Jiantang, whose intentions are unclear?" Su Fengnian only felt confused. He didn't know why this aloof peach blossom sword god would suddenly be so kind. After all, Wang Xianji had already come to a conclusion about Dong Tai's character. The general idea was that Dong Tai was extremely passionate about the sword, and was the most emotionless. Therefore, he was the most compatible with the way of the heavens. Moreover, Gu Jiantang, who was on the cusp of the Liang imperial court, left his territory without permission and chose to travel incognito to Mount Wudong. It could be said that he had entered the hinterland of Bailiang alone. It was obvious that he wouldn't cause any trouble on Mount Wudong. Even if Su Fengnian wasn't at the peak of his realm, he still had a high chance of winning against Gu Jiantang, who had been hiding his strength for many years. Just as Su Fengnian was puzzled, Dong Tai coughed softly and disappeared in an instant. Su Fengnian subconsciously looked towards the purple bamboo fence and found that even the old donkey had disappeared. With an ashen face, Su Fengnian turned his head stiffly and looked over. Sure enough, in the garden at the northeast corner of the thatched cottage, some of the greenery that had been growing well had been eaten away. It was like a landscape painting by a famous master that had been dug out by an ignorant child. Previously, a white-robed monk had turned around and walked into the cottage with a kitchen knife. Su Fengnian did the same. Gnashing his teeth, he ran back to the thatched cottage and quickly took down the cold knife hanging on the wall. After leaving the cottage, he angrily said, "Dong Tai, if you have the guts, don't run. I'll treat you to donkey roasted meat tonight." As a martial arts evaluation grandmaster, Dong Tai deliberately concealed his aura. Even Su Fengnian couldn't find any clues. Su Fengnian squatted on the ground and sighed. It was really a mother-f***er disaster. Sometimes when God punched you, he didn't give you a date to eat, but another punch to the head. When Su Fengnian caught a glimpse of a dress from the corner of his eye, he felt as if he was struck by lightning. When it rains, it pours. Su Fengnian was worthy of being called a king with a different surname and a great pillar of the country. He made a prompt decision. Regardless of whether he could hide for the first time or not, if he could hide for one more day, he would live for one more day. Therefore, when Su Fengnian was about to leave, Jiang Ni's voice filled with grief and indignation came from behind. "Surnamed Su. You're dead today." Chapter 1884. Carrying the red sandalwood box on her back, Jiang Ni suddenly soared into the sky with her sword. She stepped on the great Liang dragon sparrow sword. After the flying sword suddenly stopped, she looked down at the entire big lotus peak with her red eyes. Her murderous aura was shocking. It was unimaginable that a small vegetable garden could make two grandmasters regard it as a pool of thunder. Su Fengnian was out of Jiang Ni's expectations. Not only did he not directly slip down the mountain, he did not even go too far. Instead, he slyly hid in the crowd near the elephant washing pond. He squatted behind a crowded stall and bought 2 pieces of Wudong sesame seed cake from the still charming lady boss. He chewed and swallowed very slowly, as if he was tasting his last meal. The lady was also curious about why this handsome young man squatting by her feet was not willing to sit down. She blushed. Could it be that he had that kind of thought? She did not have too many ripples in her heart. She only felt that if she knew the situation would be like this, she would have asked for 2 more copper coins from him. Next to this stall was an old Taoist with a goatee who was interpreting the marriage fortune sticks for people. He was wearing an old Taoist robe that was heavily mended. Looking at the style, it was obvious that he was not a Taoist from Wudong Mountain. On the small table, there was a large bamboo pot that was polished until it was shiny, allowing customers to draw lots and then interpret the fortune sticks to receive money. Su Fengnian looked up and was surprised that this stall's business was booming. There were no less than 30 to 40 devotees waiting to draw lots. The old Taoist calmly sat behind the table, squinting his eyes and twirling his beard. The customer opposite the table was a graceful young woman. She was probably a pilgrim from Gangnam-do, who came all the way to Wudong Mountain to burn incense. Although she was not tall and her face was slightly immature, the weight of her chest was very heavy. The old Taoist calmly lifted his but slightly to glance at her waist. Qu'est-ce? What a small waist. He was worried that her waist would be blown apart by a gust of wind. Su Fengnian couldn't help but curse silently. When he was down and out, he had also done this kind of business without any capital, but he had never encountered such a good situation. Often when the bustling temple fair was over, there were no customers with a pair of hands. Looking at Su Fengnian's expression, the woman chuckled softly and said, Gongzi, although this old immortal Wu is not a Wudong Taoist, within a radius of 100 li, I have heard that his marriage fortune stick is extremely effective. I have seen with my own eyes that quite a few rich young ladies from Liangzhou came here to draw lots. There were even people who rushed over to give money to elder immortal Wu after they got what they wanted. At most, each person gave 10 taels of silver. It was truly a sincere heart. Su Fengnian took a big bite of Wudong spring sesame seed cake and said snappily, if I set up a stall here to ask for money, I would also be willing to spend money to hire some women to act. Over time, even if it doesn't work, it will still work. The woman didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As a widowed lady, she also went next door to draw lots with more curiosity than hope. After hearing this young customer boasting so much, she couldn't say anything unpleasant. She could only say, Gongzi, you really love to joke. Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. After the young lady with a slender waist and spectacular breasts shook a lot, she held it tightly in her hand and looked down timidly. She was at a loss. She stretched out her hand to hand the marriage fortune stick and asked delicately, Taoist priest, what is the meaning of this stick? Perhaps she was a woman from a big family. When she handed over the stick, her 2 fingers carefully clamped the end of the stick. She was a bit regretful that he couldn't take advantage of the opportunity to take advantage of the old Taoist priest. He lowered his head to look at the stick in his hand and then solemnly looked up at her. He then picked up the teapot and drank a mouthful of tea to moisten his throat. He then slowly said, This is the 28th stick. The young lady was uneasy and waited for him to continue. The old Taoist priest smiled. Young lady, don't worry. Although it's not the best stick, it's still a good stick. It means that if you can't get the person you like this time, you must remember not to be discouraged. There will always be a day when you see the light at the end of the tunnel. The young lady, whose forehead was already sweating, was relieved. She was full of smiles. Her rare graceful bearing of a Baelyang almost made the old Taoist priest infatuated. The young lady let the maid beside her take out an extra 100 copper coins. She happily turned around and left. The next guest was a young man with a sturdy body. He grabbed the stick pot and shook it vigorously. After a stick fell out, he grabbed it and slammed it on the table. Look at what stick it is. The old Taoist priest's eyelids trembled. He picked up the stick with a straight face and concisely said, Fei Chongfeng's endless yearning place, the 16th stick, the worst stick. The young man was stunned and angrily said, Even the 28th stick of that little girl is a good draw. Why is my 16th stick a dog's fart bad stick? Old bastard. Are you looking for trouble? The old Taoist priest turned a deaf ear to this and slightly shifted his gaze. Next. The young man angrily said, I'm not paying. The old Taoist priest was indeed an otherworldly immortal. He indifferently said, There is a rule when I interpret sticks for people. No matter the stick is good or bad, if you believe it, you will get 100 copper coins. If you don't believe it, you can leave. I will not make it difficult for you. The young man was obviously shocked. His momentum suddenly decreased and he asked, Who is this Fei Chongfeng? The old Taoist priest coldly said, He is a famous Taoist immortal Zhenren of the Dafeng dynasty. The old Taoist priest paused for a moment. With a solemn face, he said in a low voice, This Master Fei is also a good friend of my sect's founder. In the end, they even agreed to ascend together. There is nothing more grand in the world than this. The young man was speechless. In the end, he obediently took out 100 copper coins and gently placed it on the table. He left with a heavy heart. After this small storm, the old Taoist priest had the demeanor of a Taoist master. Even the tattered Taoist robe on his body seemed to have a sense of vicissitudes. Su Fengnian watched from the beginning to the end. He was quite impressed. The old liar did have some Taoist skills. The more he watched, the more interested he became. The following words from the customers were relatively ordinary. There was neither extremely bad nor extremely auspicious. However, what was interesting was that many of the words were taken from Wang Chudong's The First Snow. For example, a young hero asked for a Qingchuan saber is like the soil, and the following sentence, I can't bear to look at the green hair of the lady, but met with the yellow shirt of the guest. These were all popular phrases taken from The First Snow. It was said that in the early years, a few noble concubines in the Liang Palace loved The First Snow very much. Not only that, even the names of the 3 songs of the Beimang Chess and Sword Music School were chosen from the original songs of The First Snow. It was conceivable that if Wang Chudong were to appear in the Central Plains, he would be a first-class guest. Every time he heard a familiar phrase, Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and smiled. In the end, he looked a little absent-minded. He remembered that there was a woman who was married thousands of miles away. She was infatuated with this book. Su Fengnian sighed. When he was about to stand up, he suddenly squatted back down. Chapter 1885. 2 familiar faces appeared among the endless stream of people at the stall next door. The young master of Yuyan Mountain Villa, Zhang Chunlin, carried a sword box on his back. There were 4 swords hidden in it, which should be the fledgling vine, monk hut, frost blade, and rootless heavenly water. Su Fengnian was at Yuyan Mountain Villa when he first met the white-clothed immortals of the Guanyin sect. Among them was the charcoal girl. Later in the western regions, Su Fengnian and Zhang Chunlin met by chance. Unexpectedly, this young man always treated him as a benefactor. Even the sword he cast from the water dragon's song sword furnace was named Frost Blade. Presumably, this kind of rebellious behavior of a swordsman who did not respect the way of the sword would provoke criticism in Jianghu. Fortunately, Yuyan Mountain Villa was like the sun in the sky. The Dragon Rock Sword Furnace and the Water Dragon Song Sword Furnace had successively cast more than 10 famous swords, making Yuyan Mountain Villa one of the top 10 gangs in Liang. Its ranking was even higher than Jiangnan's Drum Platform and Bailiang's Fish Dragon Gang. The other was the young master of the Quick Snow Villa by the Spring Lake, Yuqi Nyochuan. Unlike Zhang Chunlin who traveled alone in Jianghu, she was accompanied by a middle-aged man in plain clothes but with a dignified air. Presumably, he was her father, Yuqi Liangfu. Su Fengnian looked at Zhang Chunlin and Yuqi Nyochuan who were walking together and could not help but smile. They were a good match for each other. Zhang Chunlin had no intention of drawing lots. He just stood by Yuqi Nyochuan's side, looking at her carefully and playfully drawing lots. His gaze was gentle. The old Taoist skill in judging dishes had already been perfected to the point of perfection. As long as it was not the kind of undeniably bad lot, in fact, when encountering a customer whom he considered to be rich and powerful, he would be incomparably adept at describing a plain lot as a good lot. In the final analysis, he had recently taken advantage of the east wind brought by the Wulin World's Grand Event to set up a stall on Mount Wudong to interpret the lot. It was only a one-off business. Why would he care about returning customers? Therefore, when the young lady, who looked like she came from a good family, handed over the bamboo stick and looked at the content clearly, the old Taoist was not stingy with his smile and said happily, "Miss, this is a rare lucky stick. All the heroes in the hall are here. I wonder who will be the top scholar?" There was also an allusion to this story. It was said that after the previous emperor unified the Central Plains, he opened the imperial examinations for the first time. When he saw all the outstanding talents standing in the main hall, he was very pleased and thus asked this question. "The meaning of this lot is very good. I believe that you don't lack good pursuers around you." "Haha, actually, I don't need to say anything more. I just want to say one more thing. It's better if you don't get blinded by your choices and waste your time." Yuqi Liangfu smiled faintly. As a well-deserved authority in Jianghu, he naturally could see the weight of this old Taoist. But no matter what, his daughter was able to draw a good lot. Naturally, he had no reason to be unhappy. Yuqi Juchuan turned his head and said excitedly to his father, "Father, didn't I say that the divination here is very effective?" Yuqi Liangfu's eyes were filled with affection as he smiled and said, "It's very effective." She thought of something and turned her head to ask tentatively, "Taoist priest, can I take this lot?" The old Taoist was in a difficult position. But when he caught a glimpse of the lady's father's action of taking out money, he immediately smiled and said, "It's fine if you take it. I'll just write another one on the spot. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal." Yuqi Juchuan received the bamboo stick with both hands and winked at her father. Yuqi Liangfu smiled helplessly and simply placed the entire money pouch on the table. She raised the bamboo stick high above her head. Under the warm autumn sun, she raised her head, focused and happy. On the side, Zhang Chunlin also became happy. Because the two villas were both among the top upstarts in Liangjianghu, and unlike the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool, or the Dragon Tiger Mountain and Wudong Mountain, the Swift Snow Mountain Villa and Yuyan Mountain Villa had the potential to be natural allies. In fact, Yuqi Liangfu had taken a fancy to Zhang Chunlin, who had a gentle temperament, the first time the young man paid a visit, and he had long regarded him as a good son-in-law. Especially Zhang Chunlin, who had suddenly become rich, after entering Jianghu, he did not have the bad habit of calling his friends to wander the Jianghu. As the only heir of the huge Yuyan Mountain Villa, he actually came alone with only the sword box, which made the shrewd Yuqi Liangfu very much approve of him. Moreover, the young man's parents, the virtuous couple of Yuyan Mountain Villa, had always thought that they were kind and had a good reputation in Jianghu. But deep down, Yuqi Liangfu also had some considerations that he could not tell others. Now that the northern sect of Liang Mountain Villa had withered, and Jianghu's secret was that Zhang Chunlin's mother came from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea, and was once a talented qi cultivator with a bright future. Yuqi Liangfu had to think deeper and further. If the Swift Snow Mountain Villa and Yuyan Mountain Villa were successful in their marriage, on the surface it seemed that the latter was climbing up the social ladder, but in the future it could be the foresight of the Swift Snow Mountain Villa. Of course, if his daughter was not fated to be with Zhang Chunlin, Yuqi Liangfu would not resort to such shady business. After all, to Yuqi Liangfu, who was ambitious and ruthless but had never remarried after losing his wife, his daughter's happiness was also very important. It was even more important than Zhuangzi's position in Jianghu. Yuqi Liangfu had never denied that for the sake of Snow Mountain Manor's rise, he had spared no effort and no lack of cold-blooded methods. However, this middle-aged man had always insisted that the reason he had put so much effort into Jianghu was so that his only daughter would not have to put so much effort into Jianghu in the future. Yuqi Juchuan, who had gotten what he wanted, was leaving shoulder to shoulder with Yuqi Liangfu. He suddenly leaned over and asked in a low voice, "Father, how many more years do you plan on delaying Aunt Lu? Aunt Lu is not young anymore." Yuqi Liangfu, who had not exposed his secret, flushed red. Although that woman had never appeared in the manor, everyone in the manor had more or less heard of her. However, Yuqi Liangfu had never thought that someone would have the guts to let his daughter hear about it. Yuqi Liangfu narrowed his eyes slightly, his thoughts turning rapidly. If he found out who had leaked the heavenly secrets, then don't blame him for throwing that person into the spring deity lake to feed the fishes. Yuqi Juchuan seemed to be completely unaware of her father's unsightly expression and gloomy thoughts. She said indifferently, "Then just marry her. It's not a big deal." "Father, you're so secretive. You really don't have the slightest bit of heroic spirit. Be careful that I don't worship you in the future." Yuqi Liangfu's expression returned to normal, and he softly grunted. She inexplicably added, "You're not allowed to get angry." Yuqi Liangfu smiled and said, "I know." Just as Zhang Chunlin followed the father and daughter and turned around, he caught sight of a person from the corner of his eye. His eyes immediately widened, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. However, when he saw that person raise a finger and shushed him, Zhang Chunlin forced himself to remain calm and continued to walk forward with a calm expression. Su Fengnian, who had finished eating the Wudong spring sesame seed cake, stopped Zhang Chunlin from speaking, then clapped his hands and prepared to leave. After the little clay figurine searched the sky with its sword to no avail, it returned home in a huff. It reckoned that its anger had more or less subsided by now. At the very least, it wouldn't take out its sword and hack people as soon as it saw them. As for whether it would be a few words of abuse or a closed door, with Su Fengnian's thick skin, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, at this moment, the dense stream of people between LV Zooting and the elephant cleansing pool suddenly separated, just like Wudong's old sect leader Wang Zhongluo's one finger splitting the river. Chapter 1886. Su Fengnian rubbed his forehead and stood up, but he didn't leave. It was the Mount Hui woman who had walked out of LV Zooting. Even though she wasn't wearing her world-shaking purple robes today, a certain Jianghu person with good status still recognized her first. Then, she was like a flood dragon entering an ant's nest. The people in front of her couldn't help but move to the side. Yuqi Liangfu stopped and cupped his fists with a smile. Alliance Master Shen Yuan. Shen Yuan Qingfeng turned a deaf ear to him and walked past the three of them. Yuqi Liangfu also seemed to be used to this. He stood in place and waited for the owner of the Moonless Tower to walk a dozen steps away before continuing to walk forward. Yuchi Nyochuan couldn't help but turn his head and glance at her. That legendary woman who had made countless heroes of Liang River submit to her purple robes. Of the 13 champions of auspicious talisman, she alone held 3 of them. It was rumored that she had once rejected the current emperor, and even rumored that she comprehended immortality by watching the snow for a night on the bull mound. Yuchi Nyochuan murmured in a small voice, "She really is a beautiful woman, but cold as ice." Yuchi Liangfu hurriedly glared at his daughter. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked straight to the old Taoist stall. The latter swallowed his saliva and didn't know what to do. She looked down at the silent elder immortal Wu and calmly asked, "Is it effective?" The old Taoist wasn't blind, nor was he deaf. After learning of this beautiful woman's unique identity, he didn't have the guts to have any devious thoughts even if he were to suddenly become a true Taoist master. Shenyuan Zi's mood swings in the Great Snow Plateau were known to almost everyone in Liang. She dared to obstruct Wang Xianji of Martial Emperor City on Guangling River. She dared to obstruct the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, outside Great Peace City. She dared to obstruct Chao Chongqing outside Great Peace City. She dared to act so crazily because she was Shenyuan Zi. No matter how big Liang River was, how many people could be so unreasonable and crazy? Thus, when the old Taoist heard her question, he braced himself and replied with trepidation, "Reporting to Alliance Master, it's not very effective." He really didn't dare to boast. If he didn't meet her requirements, wouldn't he be digging his own grave with a hoe? Shenyuan Qingfeng's lips twitched. Oh! The old Taoist knew that things were not going well. He quickly said, "It works most of the time, but I can't guarantee that it will work every time." Su Fengnian, who was watching from the side, admired the old Taoist's quick-wittedness from the bottom of his heart. In any kind of swindling in the world, the most important thing was to be able to make the words sound. Only then could one be in an invincible position. Ordinary people couldn't do technical work. Unfortunately, he was embarrassingly short of money and had no way to reward her. Shenyuan Qingfeng's face was expressionless. He reached out and grabbed the bamboo tube that contained 108 marriage sticks. He raised his arm slightly and shook it gently. Her wrist, which was as smooth as jade, slowly twisted. Every time the pot turned, the old Taoist's heart would tremble. In the past, it meant that he would receive 100 copper coins, but now, it was very likely that he would lose his life. Finally, a stick jumped out of the bamboo tube. After she twisted it, she slowly said, "2 lives in 1 body, a lonely shadow." "What number is it?" The old Taoist even had the thought of dying. Did this lousy stick still need him to interpret it? The old Taoist almost collapsed on the bench. He said with a trembling voice, "It's the 84th lot." On the verge of death, the old Taoist suddenly had an idea. He gathered his courage and said loudly, "Alliance Master, this is exactly the kind of situation where it doesn't work." Many kind-hearted pilgrims nearby broke out in cold sweat for the old Taoist. Shenyuan Qingfeng threw the stick back into the bamboo tube and continued to turn it. The old Taoist stared at the bamboo tube without blinking. He muttered in his heart, praying to all the immortals, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. Not to mention the Zhenwu Great Emperor in Wudong, he didn't even forget the local temple in his hometown in River Province. However, when the woman said the second lot, the old Taoist's heart was completely dead. Hoping for a fish from a tree, but in the end, you won't get it. She still asked, "What number is it?" The sweat-drenched old Taoist sighed softly and said weakly, "It's the 54th lot." She held the stick in one hand and the tube in the other. She didn't throw the stick back into the tube, nor did she say anything. She narrowed her long and narrow red phoenix eyes. The old Taoist lowered his head and said dejectedly, "My lot isn't working." The old Taoist didn't even dare to call himself a poor Taoist anymore. She secretly glanced elsewhere. After a moment of hesitation, she began to shake the bamboo tube for the 3rd time. A bamboo stick gently fell on the table. The old Taoist closed his eyes and pretended to be dead. He heard the cold voice above his head. "Divination determines doubts. If you don't doubt, how can you divine?" The old Taoist, who was already on the verge of collapse, was in a daze. He didn't come back to his senses for a moment. Someone replied on his behalf, "The 11th lot, the middling lot." The old Taoist, who finally came back to his senses, was ecstatic. He said in a heart-wrenching voice, "Alliance Master, it's a neutral lot." It's really a neutral lot. The old Taoist cried tears of joy. The world was like this. After going through the gates of hell and returning to the world of the living, he believed that as long as he had a mouthful of cold water to drink and a cold steamed bun to eat, it would already be a great blessing. She sank into contemplation. After smiling, she unexpectedly shook the bamboo tube for the 4th time. Everyone said that things shouldn't be done more than 3 times, but she still shook the bamboo tube for the 4th time. This time the old Taoist, who had probably resigned himself to fate, somehow found the energy to look left and right, trying to find the benefactor who previously helped him explain the lot. However, it was difficult to find in the vast sea of people. This time, after Shenyuan Qing Feng drew the bamboo stick, he didn't report the contents of the lot. Instead, he looked at it and handed it to the old Taoist. Like the most ordinary person who asked for a lot, he asked, "What's the meaning?" The old Taoist trembled as he took the bamboo stick. He answered loudly, "Winning lot. Winning lot. Winning lot." The old Taoist only repeatedly signed the 2 words in a loud voice. She didn't get angry. After waiting for the old Taoist to calm down a bit, she continued to ask, "What's the meaning?" The old Taoist raised his sleeve to wipe his tears. He stood up with difficulty, held the lot with both hands and bowed. With a terrified expression he said, "Reporting to Alliance Master, this lot is the 96th lot. Perhaps 10 years, perhaps 7 or 8 years, perhaps 5 or 6 years, perhaps 3 or 4 years. This lot says that when it comes to marriage, haste makes waste. You must wait patiently." The old Taoist didn't forget to say, "It's not necessarily accurate. It's not necessarily effective." Shenyuan Qing Feng neither agreed nor disagreed. He reached out his hand. The old Taoist hurriedly handed the bamboo stick to this terrifying woman who was like the king of hell. Then, she said something that shocked everyone. "Your divination is quite effective. Very good." She lowered her head and put down the bamboo tube. She took out 3 lots in succession. 2 of them instantly turned into fine powder after leaving the bamboo tube. As a result, she only left 2 lots. She raised her head and looked at the old Taoist who looked like he had just climbed out of an elephant washing pool. After thinking for a bit, she said, "You solved the 4th lot for me." The old Taoist couldn't help but widen his eyes. His lips were dry. He heard her slowly say, 100 taels of gold, 1 Taoist secret manual, 1 house in Bailiang's Lingzhou, and 1 guest position on Mount Hui. You can choose any one of them. The old Taoist cried tears of joy again. With tears streaming down his old face, he said, "I want to go to Mount Hui. I want to be a guest in Great Snow Plains." Shenyuan Qing Feng turned and left with a cold expression. She took the 2 marriage lots with her. Chapter 1887. The old Taoist stood there and muttered to himself. No one knew what he was mumbling to himself. Suddenly, he kicked the bench away and laughed out loud. "Why would I want to be a Taoist priest? From today onwards, I'm a guest of Mount Hui. A first-class one." It was obvious that even if the old Taoist continued to open his stall, no one would be interested in asking for divination. Suddenly, a teasing voice sounded in the old Taoist's ears. "Old immortal, this is Mount Wudong, which is full of Taoists. It's not appropriate for you to speak like that." The old Taoist, who was full of pride, frowned and turned his head to look. He saw a young man who he thought could barely be called a handsome young master. The old Taoist snorted coldly. "So what if I said it? This poor Taoist is a first-class guest of Mount Hui. Even if this poor Taoist met old Immortal Chen and old Taoist Yu, if this poor Taoist met them now, I would probably be able to ask for a cup of tea." The young man gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Amazing." The woman beside the young man laughed angrily. "Old Wu, it was this young man who spoke up for you. Are you blind?" The old Taoist was stunned. He immediately changed his expression and smiled. "This poor Taoist has been rude. Please don't blame me." The old Taoist strode towards the woman's stall. His Taoist robe sleeve swayed violently. He had the style of a dragon and tiger. "Sister Han, come, come. Help me and this young man get 2 pieces of Wudong spring sesame seed cake. Remember to spread the cake bigger. I don't lack money. Besides, I'm not a stingy person." The woman shook her head helplessly. She was nimble and skillful. Soon, she handed the 2 a piece of Wudong spring sesame seed cake. It was steaming hot and fragrant. When the old Taoist took the sesame seed cake, he wanted to touch the woman's hand. The latter was faster than him and did not let the old Taoist have his way. The old Taoist took a big bite of the spring sesame seed cake and said with a smile, "Sister Han, why are you still doing such tiring work? You won't be able to earn much money even if you wake up early and work late at night. Why don't you accompany me to Mount Hui?" The woman rolled her eyes. "Why are we going to Zhongyuan?" The old Taoist chuckled and said, "Sister, don't you know what I'm thinking?" The woman was stunned at first, then she flew into a rage out of humiliation. Scram! The old Taoist did not give up and said, "Sister, didn't your man die a long time ago outside the Liangzhou Pass? So what if he remarried after so many years? Your family is so pitiful. It's good to have a reliable man to take care of you. What's more, didn't you ask Big Brother to read the lot before?" The woman, who was already extremely angry, turned pale. She took a few steps forward, grabbed the spring sesame seed cake in the old Taoist's hand, and threw it to the ground. Scram! No matter who I sell spring sesame seed cakes to, I won't sell them to a disgusting person like you. No matter how much money you give me, I'll still find it dirty. The old Taoist wasn't angry, but he said regretfully, "Sigh, Sister Han, you're a good woman, but it's a pity you don't have the life to enjoy life. Forget it, forget it. Let's just assume that we're not fated to be together." The woman no longer paid any attention to this disrespectful old man. The old Taoist sighed to himself, then turned to the young man and said with a smile, "All right, this poor Taoist can only go to the Central Plains to enjoy life. The green mountains never change, and the green water flows forever. Young master, if you want to go to Mount Hui in the future, just mention this poor Taoist's name." The young man smiled and said, "All right." The old Taoist left in a carefree manner. The young man asked, "Old Taoist, you don't even want the stall anymore?" The old Taoist didn't turn around. He waved his hand and said in a seemingly magnanimous manner, "Why would I want those worthless things? If you like them, they're yours." After the old Taoist had walked far away, the woman said to the young man softly, "He didn't even tell young master what his name is, and even mentioned his name. I've seen thick-skinned people, but I've never seen someone as thick-skinned as him. Fortunately, I heard that this old man is from Hezhou. Otherwise, he'd really embarrass our Bailiang." Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "From your accent, you're from Bailiang's Lingzhou?" The woman had a strange look in her eyes. After a while she said, "Young master, why are you asking this?" Su Fengyan, who was swallowing Wudong's spring sesame seed cake, almost choked. The woman covered her mouth and laughed. "Look at how scared you are, I'm just teasing you." Su Fengyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He ate the spring sesame seed cake as he walked to the stall next door. He lifted the bench and turned his head with a smile. "Sister-in-law, the guy who treated me to spring sesame seed cake ran away. Why don't I help you solve the lot and treat it as money for the cake?" After the commotion caused by the woman with a frightening aura, the business of the woman's stall had become cold and cheerless. She sat on the bench and gently patted her waist. She looked at the young man with a gentle smile and asked suspiciously, "You know how to solve the lot?" Su Fengyan nodded and said, "It's my old profession." The woman shook her head and smiled. "Young master, you're not as good as that old man. I won't fall for it. Don't worry, I'll treat you." Su Fengyan asked curiously, "Sister-in-law, why did you come from Lingzhou to Wudong Mountain to set up a stall?" The woman said calmly, "My family is here. I came to the mountain to burn incense and pray for blessings a while ago. After seeing the scene here, I thought that I know how to do these things. Since I have nothing to do, I thought that I could earn more money by setting up a stall." Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "I'm guessing that your children are all studying in Mengguan school?" "That's right, in Bailiang, books are expensive. They eat money the most." The woman stopped talking and stared at Su Fengyan in a daze. Su Fengyan, who was feeling aggrieved, said helplessly, "Sister-in-law, I'm really not that kind of person." The woman couldn't help but laugh. "You really can't take a joke. You're not like the men in Bailiang." Su Fengyan pretended to be angry. "Sister-in-law, don't scold me." The woman waved her hand and brought over a small stool and a bowl of calming soup. She sat opposite Su Fengyan and smiled. "The biscuits are for you. This bowl of calming soup can be considered the payment for clearing the sign. Sister-in-law, you can't read, so you can't lie to me." Su Fengnian finished eating the spring sesame seed cake and leaned over to take a big gulp of the calming soup. How can I? The woman held the bamboo tube with both hands. Her eyes were sincere. Su Fengnian sat upright and still. He smiled and didn't say anything. After placing the sign on the table, she used both her thumb and index finger to hold the head and tail. Since she couldn't read, she didn't need to take the extra step of looking at it carefully. She also used both hands to hand the sign to Su Fengnian. That silent solemnity seemed to be handing over her life. The common people who had no fate with history always believed that there was a deity above their heads. They would be willing to believe that there would be blessings in the next life. Only then would they painstakingly climb high and burn incense to pray. Su Fengnian took the bamboo stick. After reading the sign, the corners of his mouth curled up. He said softly, "Forgetting my feet, it's appropriate to wear. Forgetting my waist, it's appropriate to wear. The 72nd lot. The top lot." The woman couldn't read, but she could roughly understand the contents of the sign. As for the two words top lot, it was concise and to the point. There was no need to doubt it. She smiled in relief. Su Fengnian took back the bamboo stick and put it back into the bamboo tube. He drank a mouthful of calming soup and smiled. Sister-in-law is a good person. Good things will happen to you. Her smile was tranquil. Chapter 1888. After that, the two of them chatted casually. Most of the time, she talked while he listened. She talked about the scenery of Lingzhou in her eyes. Of course, most of it was about the education of the two children in her family. She said that the older children were not bad and were not so naughty. Although no one had ever heard the teachers praise them, and most likely they would not be able to pass the county exam. Even passing the county exam and becoming a scholar would not be easy. However, every time she saw the child reading under the light and shaking his head like a scholar, she would feel very happy for no reason. At the same time, the younger child gave her a headache. He would rather work in the fields than study at a private school. At such a young age, he wanted to go to war and kill barbarians. In the end, she said that she did not know how the other places in Bailiang were doing. In the past 2 years, at least the children in Lingzhou could get cheap books from private schools. It was so cheap that even a poor family like her felt it was cheap. This was because there was an official surnamed Su in Lingzhou. It was his idea. That official seemed to have said that Bailiang had fewer people, but there could be more scholars. She did not know if it was true or not. In any case, those books were indeed much cheaper than 5 or 6 years ago. That was why she said that official surnamed Su was a good person. Unfortunately, she heard that he left Lingzhou to become an official in Liangzhou. Su Fengnian smiled gently and looked into the distance. He said softly, "Zhu Zi is good in everything, but his alcohol tolerance is bad." The woman did not understand and did not ask further. There was business at her stall. The woman asked, "Sir, can I have that lot back?" Su Fengnian smiled. "Then I will have to look for it. Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I will send it back to you when I find it." She nodded. After she stood up, the woman suddenly blushed. "Sir, you can call me aunt. Don't call me sister-in-law." Su Fengnian was confused. The woman snorted and went to the stall next door. Su Fengnian shook his head. He did not understand. He held the bamboo tube upside down and poured out the bamboo lots. After Yuqi Yuquan and Shenyuan Qingfeng, 5 of the original 108 lots were missing. He found the bamboo stick that the woman had shaken out and stood up to deliver it. She realized that this young man, who was so idle that he had become a fortune-teller, didn't seem to understand what she meant. Thus, she felt a little embarrassed. She glanced at the bamboo stick and carefully put it away. She raised her head and asked, "Which stick? Don't lie to me." Su Fengnian shook his head and said seriously, "I'm not lying." She smiled and said, Go. Sister-in-law won't delay you from swindling money." Somewhat depressed, Su Fengnian sat back down at the table and resumed his old business. He was familiar with the business and began to openly solicit business. It was just that the old Taoist with the goatee had left behind such a mess. Good news didn't leave the house, but bad news traveled 1,000 miles. In addition, the nearby stalls believed that Su Fengnian was a money-grubbing swindler. Moreover, he was young and didn't wear a frightening Taoist robe. Naturally, he gave people the impression that he didn't know how to do things properly. Groups of pilgrims and tourists passed by, clearly not interested in stopping to draw lots. It was rare that 2 or 3 young women wanted to say something and went forward to draw lots. In the end, they were all tactfully refused by their family elders or men of the same age. Su Fengnian could only drink the calming soup in small mouthfuls. He was really bored to death. Su Fengnian gradually changed from sitting upright and still, to sitting with one leg crossed over the other, and then to lying on the table and shaking the bamboo tube. In the end, he simply shook out bamboo lots himself. He didn't even look at the lot and casually threw it back. The woman next door wiped the sweat from her forehead and teased, "How can you do business like this? The most difficult thing in the world is to take money from other people's pockets. Young master, you're really good." Su Fengnian sighed and said, "Do you really want me to borrow a Taoist robe from Wudong?" The woman was puzzled and said, "Young master doesn't seem like someone who lacks money. Do you really care about that little bit of money?" Su Fengnian subconsciously glanced in the direction of the thatched cottage and said with a gentle smile, "My wife is the most useless. She only likes to collect copper coins. No matter how big or small they are, she doesn't dislike them. She's just like a miser." The woman was overjoyed. "It's a good thing your wife isn't here." Then she advised, "Women are all like this. Young master, you should be more open-minded." Su Fengnian deeply agreed. Swallows eat mud. Many little drops make a mickle. This is the truth. The woman let out a long breath and raised her hand to stroke the hair on her temples that was soaked in sweat. "Sister-in-law will go back first." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Going down the mountain so early? There are so many things scattered here and there. Can you move them?" She pointed to a young woman who was slowly walking over from the mountain road outside LV Zooting and said with a smile, "She's my niece. She sells rouge and face powder at Yuqingguan, which is higher up the mountain. I reckon she's already sold out. In the past, she would come even later to help me. Today, I'll be lazy and go down the mountain early." Su Fengnian stood up and said, "If we go down the mountain from here, there are still a lot of mountain roads to go. Sister-in-law, I'll help you pick a path?" She shook her head and said firmly, "No need. I have a lot of things here, but they're not heavy." Su Fengnian joked, "Sister-in-law, just take it that I have bad intentions. In any case, I'll send you to the memorial arch at the foot of the mountain, okay?" The woman lightly spat and glared at Su Fengnian, who spoke without thinking. She laughed and said, "You're not afraid of being disliked, but I'm afraid. My niece is very shrewish. What? Could it be that you've taken a fancy to her? Then sister-in-law can be a matchmaker." Su Fengnian glanced at the young woman who was getting closer and closer. He gasped. Her waist was not a willow tree, but a big locust tree. He smiled bitterly and said, "Forget it." She took the opportunity when her young niece was not close to the 2 neighboring stalls. She faced Su Fengnian and asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" At this moment, she saw that the young man was handsome. His eyes were especially clear. They were so clean that they were like the elephant washing pool she saw when she first climbed Wudong Mountain. Su Fengnian said, "I've been outside Liangzhou Pass, to Huayang Pass, and to Huta City." She said calmly, "I see." Su Fengnian grinned. She asked for no reason, "Do you think the Beimang barbarians will fight all the way here? Will they fight all the way to Lingzhou?" Su Fengnian's expression was firm and said, "As long as there is one person left in the Bailiang cavalry, then the Beimang barbarians' horses will not be able to step on the grass and trees inside Bailiang Pass." She nodded and then smiled. "You talk so big. You speak as if you're a high-ranking official." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "I'm not a high-ranking official." She said unhappily, "Do you even need to say that?" Su Fengnian was still unwilling to give up. "Sister-in-law, you really don't need to help carry the burden?" Her following words made Su Fengnian dumbstruck. "Don't call me sister-in-law. I've seen many Jianghu people these days. I heard them say that when our young prince roamed the Jianghu, he had a catchphrase. It was something like, 'Nothing is better than dumplings. Nothing is better than sister-in-law.'" Su Fengnian wiped his face with his hand. He was devastated. "Did no one mention the phrase, 'Return my ass,' I said at the top of the snowfield to you? Isn't it more arrogant than this catchphrase? Besides, this phrase was also heard by a sloppy wooden sword ranger somewhere, and then he insisted on teaching me." The woman's eyes were mischievous. She didn't say anything else and turned around to pack up. Su Fengnian looked at her back and finally didn't dare to call her sister-in-law. He only asked, did the government embezzle or delay the payment of the pension? She paused and didn't turn around. She shook her head and said, no. His old sergeant often sent us extra money a few years ago. It wasn't last year. She paused and then said softly, I only heard this spring that the old sergeant died in Huta City. She didn't turn her head after that. She knew that the first marriage lot she shook wasn't the bamboo lot in her arms. She didn't know how to read, but she remembered the number of words on the lot. But this wasn't an important matter. Commoners, no matter how hard their lives were, as long as there was hope, they could grit their teeth and live. Her hope was the 2 children. As for whether the lot she shook today was good or bad, it didn't matter. In the end, before she and her niece took the burden and left, she inadvertently saw the young man who always gave people the impression that he was clean. He sat behind the table with his back straight and his hands clenched in his lap. He was quiet. He didn't look like a young man, but more like an old man. The spring breeze was far away and he could only silently bask in the warm autumn sun. Chapter 1889. In front of the brand new thatched cottage in the quiet part of Big Lotus Peak, it had never been so lively. The white-robed monk was tall, but he gave people the feeling that he was in perfect harmony. The string of beads on his chest was dim in color, obviously different from the precious Buddhist beads of the many great temples in the Central Plains. Since returning from a long journey to the west, he didn't have any beads, only a string of peach-wood Buddhist beads. This string of beads was a token of love between him and his wife. After she gave it to him, she actually regretted it, because later she heard that peach wood was a material highly respected by Taoists. It could ward off evil spirits, but in Buddhism, peachwood Buddhist beads weren't worth mentioning. But the white-robed monk Li Shaoxin never left this string of Buddhist beads except for hanging it on the wall before he went to sleep. In Buddhism, there was a saying, be mindful of your heart and mind. His common name was Li Shaoxin. Therefore, when he entered the capital in white, the old emperor of Liang gave him a string of priceless 7 treasures beads, which he casually threw into a chest. After having a daughter, Li Shaoxin, his wife picked a dozen beads every now and then, weaved them into a ring and put it on her daughter's head. The little girl, who liked to run around the 2 Zen temples, didn't know the value of these beads and would soon lose them. Fortunately, no one in this family of 3 would feel bad. At this time, opposite the white-robed monk sat 3 Taoist priests from the 2 Taoist ancestral courts. Bai Yu, who had just been promoted to governor of Liangzhou, Qi Xianxia, who was also a Taoist priest of Mount Longhu, and Han Gui, who was from Qingshan Taoist Temple of Wudong. Not far away, Li Shaoxin Wu Nanbei, the only disciple of the current Wudong leader Li Yufu, and Han Gui's disciple Qing Xian were squatting together, listening to Li Shaoxin talk about her soul-stirring Jianghu experiences. The white-robed monk's wife had already taken a nap. When she learned that the 3 Taoist priests had come, she leaned against the door and said, there are so many of them. They don't come with good intentions. The white-robed monk smiled and said, it's just a quarrel. Don't worry. She was still worried and said, then I won't prepare tea. Let them be thirsty, but you can find an excuse to come in and drink water. Okay. Won't that be rude? Not at all. By the way, if you really can't beat them in an argument, remember to hit them but not their faces when you hit them. Otherwise, you'll be left with nothing to say. Got it? What, you can't beat them? Then forget it. Let's have a peaceful chat. When we're outside, harmony breeds wealth. We can beat them. Oh. Remember not to hit them too hard. Our daughter still wants to play on the mountain for a few more days. I know. Taoist priest Taoist temple. Taoist? He asked, is Headmaster Li in closed-door cultivation at Small Lotus Peak? Of the Taoist priest. NN. Taoha. He gently stroked the string of mahogany Buddhist beads and said indifferently, the earth sinks in the southeast and the 4 desecrations flow to the Sun position. Han Gui wore a plain Taoist robe and a Dongxian scarf. He looked a little sad. Bai Yu, who had hurt his eyes from reading, narrowed his eyes out of habit, as if he had nothing to do with it. Qi Xianxia looked up at the rolling sea of clouds at the top of Big Lotus Peak. The white-clothed monk asked with a smile, if you can't do what you want in life, even if you're 100 years old, you'll still die. Did Chao Zhongqing say it after he entered the Great Chu chessboard and waited for the imperial edict? Bai Yu shook his head. Chao Chongqing's teacher, Li Mi, said that Chao Chongqing was able to change from the scholarly sage to the tyrannical way. I'm afraid this sentence was the finishing touch. The white-clothed monk gently twirled his Buddhist beads. If the three things of a good flower, a full moon, and a long life are the happiest wishes of mortals, then the pursuit of your Taoists is to have a smooth mind, right? Bai Yu rubbed his eyes lazily and asked with a smile, "What, are you going to quarrel? But there's not even a cup of tea here." The white-clothed monk said softly, "If my wife doesn't let me prepare tea, I won't dare to make a decision. As for quarreling..." The white-clothed monk looked over everyone's heads and looked not far away. He said loudly, "Disciple, come, come. Talk to our Mr. White Lotus about Buddhism." Unexpectedly, the young monk slightly raised his little bald head and said reluctantly, "Master, if it wasn't for Li Zi not letting me go, I would have gone to the Clear Jade Temple to buy rouge for Master's wife. Master's wife said that there's a young woman as beautiful as a flower there. These days, she's been selling Shu sunflower rouge at a very low price. It said that there's also Wu Yu Yen Lu Fong in Jiangnan." The white-clothed monk glared at him. "You still have the nerve to talk about Wu Yu Yen Lu? You dare to sell a small box the size of a fingernail for 5 taels of silver. If you didn't mention it to Master's wife, she wouldn't have been thinking about it the whole night. Last night, she was talking about Wu Yu Yen Lu in her sleep." The young monk said confidently, "I just think that the rouge is really good. Those at the Escape summer town at the foot of the mountain are cheap, but the fragrance is too pungent. Although the box is bigger, it's not like Master didn't see it yesterday. Master thought that it wasn't expensive, so Master's wife put so much on her face. When she lowered her head while eating, the rouge would fall into her bowl. It was so scary." "Master, you were obviously scared out of your wits, but you still said to Master's wife something like, 'Such a scene is really rare in the world.'" Then Master's wife grinned and more rouge fell. The white-clothed monk coughed a few times. Bai Yu felt that if this middle-aged monk of the 2 Zen temples hadn't been absent during the battle between Buddhism and Taoism at Mount Longhu more than 10 years ago, he probably wouldn't have been able to turn the tide. The head of the Green Mountain Temple, Han Gui, was looking down. He was like an old monk in meditation. Qi Xianxia seemed to be secretly rubbing the space between her eyebrows. Suddenly, 2 voices sounded from inside and outside the house at the same time. They were full of surprise. Mai and Yanzi from the tobacco workshop? Inside the house, it was naturally the white-clothed monk's wife. Outside the house, it was Li Xianxia. The latter got up abruptly and ran into the house, shouting, "Mother!" Father recently hid 4 or 5 taels of silver under the box of scriptures. When he was hiding the money, I secretly saw it. Father told me to keep my mouth shut. But who am I? I'm Mother's daughter. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the thatched house. There was a rush of people rummaging through boxes and cabinets. The white-clothed monk looked up at the sky with a sorrowful expression. If outsiders didn't know the reason, they would definitely marvel at the solemn appearance of the Buddha who pitied the suffering of the world. When the 2 women, one older and one younger, walked out of the thatched house, the white-clothed monk rubbed his bald head and stood up. He said with concern, "It's so sunny. Do you want an umbrella?" His wife thought for a moment and waved her hand. She heroically said, "Mayan Yanzi is a rare thing. There won't be many left. What if we miss it?" Li Xianxia began to give orders. "Stupid Nanbei, go get an umbrella in the house and quickly follow us. Qing Xian and Yu Fu. Wudong Mountain is your territory. Is there a path to Yuqing Temple? If there is, then lead the way." Tong Qing, who was now full of admiration for the heroine Li Xianxia, stuck out his chest and proudly said, "Yes." Then the group of people majestically went to Yuqing Temple. The white-clothed monk didn't forget to look at their backs and remind them, "The path is difficult. Walk slowly." As if he felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, the white-clothed monk sat back on the small bench and looked at Bai Yu. He casually found a topic. "I heard that Mr. Bai Lian has 3 fears and 2 joys?" Bai Yu nodded. "There are 3 fears. I'm afraid of thunder, afraid of walking, and afraid of Zhao Ningxian asking questions. There are 2 joys. Reading to the eye and speaking to the heart." The white-clothed monk was puzzled. Zhao Ningxian. Bai Yu was a little sad. His real name is Zhao Jingxi. He is the only son of the old headmaster. His temperament is particularly simple and steady. After leaving the mountain, He experienced several tribulations and gained a blessing in disguise. Now his heart is close to the Tao. The white-clothed monk said, "Oh, is he the young Taoist who invited the Taoist Master Mansion's ancestor to come down to the mortal world?" In the end, Su Fengnian smashed the Zhenwu Great Emperor's image with one slap? Bai Yu smiled bitterly and said nothing. The white-clothed monk seemed to have a deep prejudice against the young lord. He said angrily, "If you want to fight, then fight. Why do you have to pretend to be mysterious? What's the difference between you and a child crying and going home to ask for help from the elders? Especially that Su Fengnian, he's even more outrageous. He's bullying others with his power. What a disgrace." Bai Yu, who was now a retainer of the Su family in Bailiang, tactfully shut his mouth. The white-clothed monk snorted, "My daughter has never complained in front of me. Every time she fought, she beat those little baldies until they cried and ran back to their masters." Han Gui smiled knowingly. He seemed to be thinking of his disciple Qing Xian and the little Taoist boy Yu Fu who was brought back to the mountain by the headmaster Li Yufu. People outside the world may not be heartless. At this moment, Qi Xianxia, the only one of the three Taoists who cultivated, suddenly stood up. He turned around and looked as if he was facing a great enemy. The white-clothed monk was still sitting on the small bench calmly, slowly twirling the Buddha beads. A man with white hair on his temples appeared in everyone's sight. He was empty-handed. He smiled and said, "Since the Thunder of Mind, I have comprehended 2 more moves in the past 20 years. I want to learn from the 2 of you. Now that Wang Xianji is dead, I can only come here to disturb you." Li Dongxin slowly stood up and said indifferently, "Hurry up and fight while my wife is not here. But let's make it clear in advance. Whether it's a fight or a battle of life and death, don't destroy the hut. Otherwise, I will really be angry." Chapter 1890. After hearing the monk's harsh words, he smiled and said, "I only care about the blade. I don't care if you're angry or not." Li Dongxin dismissed it with a smile and gently clasped his hands together, greeting him politely. Black Buddhist beads, white kasaya. It was truly out of this world. Qi Xianxia pulled Bai Yu under the roof of the thatched cottage. Han Gui followed closely behind. The 3 of them had guessed the identity of the visitor. It was unexpected, but it was also unexpected. Thunder Square. This was undoubtedly a thunderous title. Whenever people talked about spring and autumn sword armor Li Chungang, they would talk about the wooden horse ox, the 2-sleeved green snake, and the sword opening the gate of heaven. Not to mention Liang Zhonghu. Even in the imperial court, everyone knew the famous technique of the old Minister of War, Thunder Square. It was with this technique that the Zhao clan of Liang Zhonghu defeated Mao Shulang, a master of the Eastern Vietnam and Tang Empire. With this, he established his position as the #1 saber user in the world. Gu Jianghang was to the saber, like Li Chungang to the sword, and Wang Xiu to the spear. This kind of martial arts status was the dream of countless people in Jianghu. However, the most embarrassing thing about Gu Jianghu was that he stood at the top of the world's saber users. His ranking in the previous martial arts competitions was not outstanding. Not to mention Wang Xianji of Martial Emperor City, he was probably not even at the top. More importantly, in the competition between the sword and the saber, whether it was the old god of sword Li Chungang or the god of peach blossom sword Dong Tai, whether it was in terms of cultivation or pure combat power, Liang Zhonghu recognized them as the top swordsmen of the new and old generation. They were far ahead of Gu Jianghu. When His Royal Highness first entered the world of martial artists, Wang Xianji, Dong Tai, and Chao Chongqing were known as the only 3 outstanding people in the world. The other 7 people were clearly reduced to the role of reading books with the crown prince. The 7 people, including Gu Jiantang, were indispensable to the entire Chinese world of martial artists, but those who were ranked among the top 10 were dispensable. After Li Chungang returned to the realm of Earth Immortal, the person who used the sword declared that the gap between Gu Jiantang and Li Chungang was only 1 Gu Jiantang. In these 20 years, Gu Jiantang, who had been in charge of Great Peace City's Gu Lu for a long time, had never sparred with anyone. After that, he led the military of the 2 Liao countries with the title of Pillar of Great Peace and rarely came out. It was only when Chao Chongqing from West Chu brought Jiangxi into the capital that Gu Jiantang, who had already given his beloved saber to his son-in-law, Yuan Tingshan, slightly revealed his outstanding strength. Gu Jiantang didn't seem to care about the ranking of the martial arts role, and was even less interested in the battle between the saber and the sword. Wang Xianji had the domineering aura that no one dared to claim to be the first if he claimed to be the second in the world. Chao Chongqing had the magnificent feat of passing through the imperial city 3 times like passing through corridors. Dong Tai had the unrestrained freedom of riding on a donkey and watching the mountains and rivers. As a result, in the recent years, the new Prince of Liang, Su Fengnian, had appeared out of nowhere. Shenyuan Qingfeng had suddenly risen to power in the Great Snow Plains, and the devil Woyang had shaken both the northern Mang and Liang dynasties. Gu Jiantang was still quiet in the world of martial artists, watching the ebb and flow of the new and old world of martial artists, indifferent. Therefore, the Jianghu of the Central Plains that naturally rejected Great Peace City could never admire this supreme saber master, who was an extremely high official in the imperial court. However, it was this pillar of the country that was willing to stay out of the Jianghu that climbed Mount Wudong today, found the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, and seemed to want to destroy his invincible Vajra with one strike. Other than being obsessed with the way of the sword, Qi Xianxia had always been a pure and simple person. As for Gu Jiantang's visit, the little celestial master who had once abandoned the old way of the sword with great perseverance in Great Peace City, actually didn't care about the outcome of this peak battle. Therefore, he wouldn't make any comments or pretend to be surprised. Han Gui was praised by the old chief, Wang Zhonglo, as a sincere heart, a late bloomer, and was regarded as a good friend by the former chief, Hong Shixiang. At this moment, he was a little worried, afraid that if the commotion became too big, Wudong wouldn't be able to clean up the mess, adding unnecessary trouble to the young king. Mr. White Lotus, who only had 3 fears and 2 pleasures in life, was even less interested in fighting and killing. He moved a small stool and sat under the eaves, in a daze, his mind wandering thousands of miles away. Now that the 2 kings had joined forces to stir up the Central Plains, the imperial court originally promised to give Bailiang the grain, but there might be new problems. Chong Sui, who was in charge of the grain with his identity as the provincial governor of Lingzhou, had already sent a secret letter to Mount King Liangshan, requesting to use the Fish Dragon Gang's power to infiltrate the grain transportation of the Guangling River from Xiangfan City to Lingzhou. If there was no other choice, they would need the blood of more than 20,000 gang members. To open the way, they would win millions of stones of blood-stained grain for the Bailiang border cavalry. As a result, the 3 of them didn't care why General Gu didn't carry a saber. Gu Jiantang's talisman saber, Nan Hua, and Wudong sword maniac, Wang Xiaoping's talisman saber, Shen Shu, were equally famous in the world. Gu Jiantang was tall and had the typical physique of a northerner. His green robe was elegant, and he had the temperament of a southerner. Gu Jiantang, Jian Tang. But he used a saber. After defeating Mao Shulang, he was at the peak of Jianghu's reputation, and he was also praised as the Saber Saint. It was hard to say whether the nickname was wrong, but the name seemed to be wrong. Gu Jiantang put one hand behind his back and slowly raised the other hand. The white-robed monk, Li Dongxin, put his palms together and bowed with one palm. He lowered his gaze and silently chanted, Amitabha. Chapter 1891. Many Jianghu people heard that Shenyuan Zi had not only shown up on Mount Wudong, but had also asked for 4 marriage sticks in one go at a stall near the elephant washing pond. Su Fengnian's stall immediately became prosperous. Although they saw that Su Fengnian was just a young man and not the otherworldly expert that they thought he was, they just wanted to join in on the fun, so most of them were not stingy with their copper coins. In addition, this handsome fortune stick was indeed eloquent, so even if it was some mediocre or low-grade fortune stick, he could still speak eloquently and eloquently. Gradually, not only were the Jianghu people willing to fork out money, many pilgrims and tourists who did not involve themselves in the Jianghu also began to believe that it was true. This was especially true when a heroine from outside the Jianghu drew a very auspicious marriage stick, which made people eager to give it a try. This was because her 108th lot, May We Be Together for 1,000 Li, was not only second to the best lot stick, but also came from that great literary woman's The First Snow. Everyone had the desire to win or lose. Until now, the most auspicious lot king had not been drawn yet, so naturally it made people eager to get into action. Many onlookers who had originally scoffed at the idea of drawing lots to sever marriage also began to try their luck. Unfortunately, it was strange that after more than 2 hours, more than 100 people had finished drawing their lots, but still no one had drawn the best lot stick from the bamboo tube. This kind of scene where people were still hugging their pipa and covering half of their faces thoroughly made people want to win in one move. Many people who did not believe in heresy simply drew their lots again. Everyone saw that the young man who explained the lot drank bowl after bowl of Wudong calming soup. The copper coins were 100 copper coins and 100 copper coins. Therefore, the large and small copper coins on the table could be said to be piled up into a mountain. It was extremely spectacular. The young vassal king, who had made a lot of money, explained to a strong man who had shaken the lot stick 3 times. He reached out his hand to cover the lot stick and suddenly said loudly, "Let's close the stall, let's close the stall. Today is not the day to break a marriage." Behind the man whose face was full of resentment, a young man who had waited bitterly for nearly an hour suddenly jumped up and scolded, "Surnamed Su, are you playing with me?" Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and began to collect the copper coins. That person slapped the table. "If you dare to leave, don't blame me, Su, for exposing your secret." Su Fengnian raised his head and glanced at the exiled crown prince of the old western Shu. "Be careful not to step on dog poop when you cut off someone's path to wealth. Besides, do you think you can afford to pay the fee?" Su sneered. "Is 10,000 enough?" Su Fengnian stopped collecting the copper coins. The meaning behind Su's words was probably only understood by him, the king of Bailiang. 10,000, that was the source of 10,000 soldiers from Shu Zhao. So Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "Do you mean what you say?" Swordsmith Qi, who was standing behind Su, said softly, "It is this old man's son's idea." Su Fengnian smiled and put 2 fingers together. "I will only help you with this amount." Su's face was full of anger. He leaned forward and pressed both hands on the table. He lowered his voice and said, "Do you think I am a Taoist immortal who can scatter beans and turn them into soldiers?" Su Fengnian raised 3 fingers this time. "No sincerity. I will raise the price." Su's face darkened and he panted. The blind guqin player, Shui Songguan, who was carrying the guqin case on his back, smiled and quietly pulled on Su's sleeve. Su snorted and crossed his arms in front of his chest. Su Fengnian withdrew his hand and put away his cynicism. His eyes suddenly became cold. He looked up at the 3 old Baimang people. "Some losses, I have suffered once, and that is enough. For the sake of our past friendship, I will advise you not to learn from those spring and autumn clans. This old man, Zhao Dingxiu, knows better than you how our Su family deals with them." Su's face was red. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He was extremely ashamed. Shui Songguan, who was familiar with the inside story, sighed slightly and then gently held his hand. Su's eyes were vaguely moist. He held his hand tightly and turned his head away. It was unknown whether he didn't want to see the young king's face or he didn't dare. When this old man fled to the streets of Baimang, he had almost given up the idea of reviving Shishu. The reason why he made a comeback and made up his mind to return to the Central Plains was all because of this young king. Even their early smooth sailing was largely attributed to the various death soldiers that Bailiang buried in Shu and Zhao. However, when Chen Jibao was appointed as the king of Shishu, not only did he cut off the connection between Bailiang and them, but he also forced the real backbone of Shishu, Zhao Dingxiu, to change his mind. To put it nicely, they were judging the situation. To put it bluntly, they were burning the bridge after crossing the river. In the beginning, this old man even prepared for the worst. He prepared to face the wrath of Bailiang, especially Fu Shui and Yang Ying. But for some reason, the young king who stabbed them in the back seemed to be unaware of it. This undoubtedly made this old man, who was influenced by the benevolence of the Confucian school, feel deeply guilty. That was why Su and the other 2 went to the desert. After all, the white-clothed war saint, who once played with the territory of Shu and Zhao, was now in Guangling Road in Liang. In order to fight for the Central Plains, most of the elite troops under the king's jurisdiction went out of Shu to the east. As a result, it gave this old man a chance to make up for it or to make a new bet. Sword craftsman Qi took off the sword box and gently put it on the table. "This old man told me before leaving that 20,000 was the bottom line. Plus this full armor snow, as an extra." Chapter 1892. Su Fengnian slowly exhaled a mouthful of murky air that had accumulated for a long time. Su Fengnian was indeed resentful towards this old man's son who wholeheartedly supported the Su family in western Shu. If they had not rushed to Shu Zhao to raise the flag of restoring the country, many of the chess pieces that Bailiang had secretly buried there would not have surfaced so quickly. Even if they were not used, it would have been far better than the current awkward situation. If Chen Jibao had not completely fallen out with Bailiang back then, those spies and men of sacrifice who had used up so much of Baelyong's energy and financial resources would not have survived. According to Master Li Yishan's established plan, once Liang Imperial Court decided to drag them down in the future Battle of Liangmang, Baelyong would directly intercept the local spearhead, Baelyong's strategic rear. Therefore, regarding the continuous infiltration of Xu Zhao and Zhao, Baelyong could be said to have spared no effort, far more than the Central Plains. Therefore, a certain diligent steward of a certain Junwang manor, an old-fashioned private school teacher teaching, a peddler running around the marketplace, a beautiful courtesan from the brothel, or even a military officer with real power in the Xu Zhao army could all be the men of sacrifice of Fu Shui Fong. Taking a step back, Xu Zhao and Baelyong were cut in half by Chen Jibao. Even if the Su family's Iron Horse cavalry did not manage to defend Baelyong in the end, causing the Fu Shui Feng's chess pieces to be unable to achieve anything in the end, at the very least, those people could slowly grow old and die in Xu Zhao and Zhao with a kind of unknown regret. Not like now, where they were like wandering ghosts exposed to the light of day. Not only did Chen Jibao know their identities, even Li Yang and Zhao Go had probably begun to secretly record it, so that they could settle the score with them in the future. With regards to Su Fengnian did not hold any grudges. This young man was originally a puppet that could not even be considered as a hands-off shopkeeper. Under the general situation, he could only go with the flow. In Xu and Zhao, two places, Su pulled a blind zither player to pretend to be a young hero devil, and wandered around the Zhonghu wantonly. Perhaps it was a kind of mood similar to drowning one's sorrows in wine. Su Fengnian felt nothing but admiration for the swordsmith Qi who had gifted him a new sword, Spring and Autumn. In the end, Su Fengnian was angry at Zhao Dingxiu's betrayal, but he resented his own carelessness even more. Sometimes, a single word from a monarch could lead to the rise of a nation or the fall of a nation. A single word from a historian determined whether a person would be remembered in the annals of history or go down in infamy. A single word from a general determined victory or defeat, life or death. War was a matter of national importance. It was not a joke. Perhaps the simple-minded Su was only guilty of his and this old man's betrayal. He did not think of the Baelyong death soldiers who had taken root in Shu for many years, or the deeper level of the Liangmang War. After all, this young man from a noble family only knew that he was an ordinary survivor of Bei Mang. He only knew that this old man's son was a pedantic and strict old scholar, and that Uncle Qi was nothing more than a blacksmith with a bit more strength. What bell and cauldron food, what monarch and country, what West Shu's imperial uncle dying at the city gate, what West Shu's minister dying together with the country was the champion of spring and autumn. Other than the golden dragon embroidered Shu brocade wrapped in swaddling clothes, he had never worn the crown prince's robe. Therefore, he did not understand the generosity at all. Su secretly sniffled, showing that his temperament was weak and had no ambition to speak of. He only longed for Zhonghu, and did not like the unfamiliar court and officialdom. After the fall of the country, the old officials of the Su clan would cry when they saw him. That kind of kneeling and kowtowing ceremony, not only would it not make this unambitious young man feel happy, he would only feel that 1,000 gene weight was pressing down on his shoulders. In private, he once mocked himself to the blind female zither player that he admired. Su is useless. At some point, Wei Miao, who did not come with Su and the other two, had already stood behind the blacksmith surnamed Qi, invisibly cutting off the flow of people. Especially when the dazzling Miaozhong woman grinned and crushed the palm of a lecher, the crowd of kind-hearted men and women who came to Mount Wudong to burn incense began to scatter like birds and beasts. Most of the Zhonghu people who were conceited about their martial arts did not go far, but they still stood some distance away and cautiously watched with cold eyes. Wei Miao took a few steps forward and said straightforwardly, "The king of Shu wants me to pass on a message to both of you. There is no problem in crossing the border." Su Fengnian saw that the blacksmith surnamed Qi frowned and understood. He asked, "When did he pass this message to you? Before or after the spring snow building incident?" Wei Miao said indifferently, "I will not say. It is not important." Su Fengnian did not pay attention to this famous grandmaster of Nanzhao, and looked at the blacksmith surnamed Qi. "Also pass on a message to this old man Lu for me. The relationship between Baelyong and Shu is not like that between Baelyong and the Central Plains. Once we cannot defend Beijue City, Shu is fated to have to face the Beimang Iron Cavalry. Therefore 20,000 people must be at least, and they must be elites. Otherwise, if they come to Baelyong, they will only be of more help than help and will only be sending themselves to their deaths. The blacksmith surnamed Chi nodded. When the dust settled, Su was about to turn and leave when she heard the young king ask with a smile, "You have spent so much money on it. It can be called the most expensive marriage stick in the world. Don't you want to try your luck?" Su still insisted on leaving. Unexpectedly, her sleeve was pulled. She turned her head. Although her eyes were closed, her face was full of hope. Su's heart softened. She walked back to the table with a straight face. She picked up the bamboo tube and shook it violently. Finally, a bamboo stick was shaken out. Su Fengnian reached out and picked up the bamboo stick. He glanced at it and then showed a pitiful expression. Su's mood instantly fell to the bottom. After the previous storm of internal injuries, the young man no longer had the slightest bit of his frivolous demeanor. His eyes were red again. Su Fengnian sighed. Su turned to the blind female Guqin master and squeezed out a smile. "Let's go. This stick is not effective." Xue Songguan smiled and nodded. Su Fengnian raised his eyebrows. "Not effective." Su didn't even have the energy to bicker. She pulled Xue Songguan's hand and wanted to leave. But she heard a sentence behind her, "The 39th stick, the one you like, the one you like." "The stick is good." "Oh, it's not effective." Su was like being struck by lightning. She turned around and grabbed the marriage stick in Su Fengnian's hand. Su Fengnian's hand holding the stick was high. "Give me the money first. 100 coins. Su angrily looked at him. "You still want money?" Su Fengnian's other thumb and index finger gently twirled. "You can give me the money or not. You can look at the stick or not." Xue Songguan smiled and silently took out a beautiful purse made by the embroidered weavers. He was about to pay. Su grabbed her wrist and fiercely stared at Su Fengnian. She gritted her teeth and said, "Is it really good?" Su Fengnian said lazily, "Believe it or not, it's up to you." Even the wooden swordsmith surnamed Qi couldn't bear it. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince met this young vassal king. It was really bad and painful. Xue Songguan still gave him 100 coins, but she stretched out her hand and opened her palm. She wanted to keep it, no matter if it was good or bad. At the same time, the blind Zithermaster, whose finger mysterious realm was second only to the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, was full of vigor. She didn't give the young vassal king a chance to change the bamboo stick. She wanted the real stick, no matter if it was good or bad. Su Fengnian smiled and handed over the bamboo stick. Su grabbed it first and was stunned. Su Fengnian sighed. Xue Songguan's sad expression flashed. Sensing her subtle change, Su immediately woke up and said angrily, "Surnamed Su. You bastard." Su Fengnian laughed. I read it wrong. It's the 81st stick. It's even better than the best stick. It's the most auspicious stick." Xue Songguan suddenly raised her head and looked at Su. Her face was full of disbelief. Su hugged her tightly and said with a sobbing tone, "It's really good. It's really good." Su Fengnian leisurely shook his head and said, "The 81st stick. You can be my wife." Chapter 1893. Xue Songguan slightly broke free from Su's embrace. She turned her body, her cheeks flushed red for the first time, and then she solemnly bowed to the young king. Maybe she was grateful that he had set up a stall to interpret the lot, so Su had drawn a good lot that she had never dreamed of. Maybe she was glad that he had not died in the assassination in the rainy alley of Beimang that year, which allowed her to meet Su. Maybe she was grateful that he had urged her to stay at the last moment, which was tantamount to helping Su untie the knot in her heart. Su Fengnian waved his hand and joked, "Miss Xue, to be honest, this shortcake is really not worthy of you. He will draw a good lot, but Xue Songguan, you have truly met a bad person. So if it was you who drew the lot, I dare to say that it would definitely be a bad one. Draw it." Su had long been tormented by Su Fengnian to the point that she did not have any energy left. Even her words of, "your mother's bullshit," sounded weak. Su Fengnian beat a drowning dog. "Shortcake, since it is a good lot. Then give another 101. It is such a joyous occasion. You cannot save this little money." Su did not say anything and pulled Xue Songguan away. Although he was a minister that supported the dragon, second only to this old man's son Zhao Dingxiu, the swordsmith surnamed Qi did not participate in military and political affairs. He cupped his hands to Su Fengnian to bid farewell. Su Fengnian also stood and cupped his hands to send him off. Since they met in Jianghu, then they did not meet in Jianghu. There was only Jianghu, no court. After the spring and autumn period, there were two battles between grandmasters that fascinated Liang Jianghu. One was the battle between Li Chungang and Wang Xianji on the Eastern Sea. The other was the battle between Nu Liang Wang Su Fengnian, the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, and the great Guanzi Chao Chongqing. The three fought in Greaton City. As for the battle between Tuoba and Dong Tai, or the battle between Su Fengnian and Tuoba, which took place over 1,000 li in the western regions, because there were not many spectators, it was far less impressive than the former. Today, in front of the straw hut, it was even more lonely. There were only 3 spectators, and they were not the kind of Taoists who liked to gossip. Presumably, in the end, most of the Jianghu would not hear about this peak conflict. However, between the two sides, one was an eminent monk who had entered great peace in white robes and enjoyed the highest reputation in the world. The other was a pillar of the country who held half of the dynasty's military power. Neither of them would care about the false reputation of the Jianghu. Gu Zhentang suddenly laughed involuntarily. He withdrew his palm and shook his head. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. Narrowing his eyes, Baiyu asked curiously, "Why aren't they fighting?" Qi Xianxia said indifferently, "It's over." Baiyu was taken aback. "What? Fighting is popular in the Jianghu now?" Qi Xianxia stood ramrod straight under the eaves. From his position, although he could only see the back of the white-robed monk, Qi Xianxia could still rely on the slight trembling of the snow-white kasaya. It was just that Qi Xianxia was forcefully suppressing it. The world of Fangzhong. A kasaya was equivalent to a small kiliacosm. Only Baiyu and Han Gui could not see that world clearly. Once they entered it, the world would be turned upside down. To put it simply, Gu Zhentang's slash seemed to be casual and did not seem to have any power behind it. If it were someone else who was at the foot of the mountain would have been split open. If they were at the mouth of the river would have been flooded dozens of miles by the seawater. The string of pearls in front of the white-robed monk's chest slowly quieted down. At this moment, a large peak to the north of Big Lotus Peak suddenly shattered, the sound as heavy as thunder. Gu Zhentang said helplessly, "Li Xiaoxin, this isn't appropriate, is it?" The white-robed monk smiled. "Sorry, after this poor monk went up the mountain, this poor monk watched the Taoists practice martial arts every morning. This poor monk also learned something, and learned how to use 4 tails to deflect 1,000 pounds. Although he said that he was sorry, the middle-aged monk did not seem to have any sense of embarrassment. Gu Zhentang snorted coldly. The white-robed monk hesitated for a moment, then said with a serious expression, "Grand strength is similar to Wang Xianji's absolute strength. If it were Wang Xianji, you would also be able to injure him. Of course, if you want to win against Wang Xianji with this, it is still unrealistic." Gu Zhentang asked calmly, "Is that all?" The white-robed monk smiled. "Of course, the most important thing is that this move of yours can damage one's qi. If you hit him 7 or 8 times, Wang Xianji's qi will drop rapidly. Otherwise, I would not have used this move of yours to deflect it to the back of the mountain." Gu Zhentang said proudly, "I can hit him 12 times. The white-robed monk said exasperatedly, "Do you think you have the celestial physique that Su Gai inherited from Gao Shulu? And the great yellow court of Wudong that has an endless flow of qi? Wang Xianji can smash you to death with 3 or 4 punches." Gu Zhentang laughed coldly. The white-robed monk touched his bald head. "You really don't believe me. In this world, there are only a handful of people who truly know how powerful Wang Xianji is. Li Chungang, Su Fengnian, and at most Hong Shixiang. The others, even Dong Tai and Chao Chongqing, are unable to fully understand. After all, those two have never had a true life-and-death battle with Wang Xianji. Also, even if this poor monk does not use the essence of Wudong's martial arts and stands still for you to hit 12 times, this poor monk's body will still be as immovable as a mountain. It's just that I will have to do this personally soon, so I can't afford to waste my strength here." Gu Zhentang was silent. The white-robed monk sighed and said, "Gu Zhentang, if you can focus on the blade without any distractions, you might have a chance to fight for the title of number 1 in the world." Gu Zhentang regained his composure and said with a smile, "In this Gu's opinion, the blade can only be used to kill people on the battlefield. Using it to fight for the name of Jianghu is too much of a waste. The sword is distinguished in Jianghu, the blade drinks blood on the battlefield. Perhaps this was the true understanding of the great General Gu Gentang. Gu Gentang finally asked, I want to know, who in the world can break your Vajra physique? The white-robed monk touched his head and extended 3 fingers. Dong Tai's Taya sword. Gu Gentang nodded. He had already guessed it. The white-robed monk continued, this poor monk's wife snoring. Gu Gentang took a deep breath. He left without saying goodbye. He didn't want to know who the third person was. The white-robed monk continued, then there's this poor monk's daughter's small wooden mallet. She likes to use her father's head as a wooden fish. His daughter doesn't know how to care for her father, but her father naturally does. Bai Yu and Han Gue looked at each other and smiled. The most difficult things in the world didn't seem difficult in front of the white-robed monk Li Dongxin. Han Gue suddenly said with a bitter expression, Teacher, what about that damaged mountain peak? The white-robed monk turned his head and said with a smile, Find Su and ask for money to repair it. Han Gue thought for a moment. That's a good idea. As the provincial governor of Liangzhou, Bai Yu quickly waved his hands. No. Our Bailiang doesn't have much money now. Not long after Gu Gentang left, the group of people who went to buy rouge returned earlier than expected. Behind them, the 2 children, Qing Xian and Yu Fu, were secretly laughing. Among the 3 people in front, Li Dongbei was pulling Wu Nanbei's ear, and Li Dongxin's wife was pulling her daughter's ear. The woman said with annoyance and anger, Li Zi, are you still mother's daughter? If you didn't drag that stupid Nanbei to listen to you talk about Jianghu and delay time, he would have gone to Yuqing Temple earlier and bought the Mian Yen Ji from the Tobacco Willow Lane. Li Dongbei pulled on the stupid Nanbei's ear and said angrily, It's all your fault. What Mian Yen Ji from the Tobacco Willow Lane? You said it. Why didn't you say it earlier? Wu Nanbei said with grievance, Master's wife Li Zi, I didn't know that Master had hidden money from the start. The 3 of them looked at the white-robed monk. The middle-aged monk put his palms together and looked up at the sky. He muttered, Buddha, please bless us. We will have food to eat tonight. At this moment, no one knew that the string of Buddhist beads on the white-robed monk Li Dongxin's chest was actually a string that connected 108 peachwood beads. Because of years of wear and tear, and also because of Gu Gentang's blade, it had already dissipated like smoke. Although there was no string, the string of Buddhist beads was still connected. It was actually done by Li Dongxin in one breath. The affairs of the world were unpredictable. Dongxin was normal. Chapter 1894. Inside and outside the hall where Zhenwu the Great Emperor was worshipped, the incense was burning. An old Taoist with a solemn face quickly stepped over the threshold. Seeing the tall figure in white, the old man calmed down and slowed down his pace, standing side by side. The figure in white, who was taller than the average Bailiang man, was actually a young woman. Her face was faintly radiant. This was probably the so-called solemnity of a treasure, like a bodhisattva descending to the world. The elderly Taoist was originally here to take over the task of knocking the chimes. Although his seniority on Wudong Mountain was the highest, and he was the great spiritual master who had been in charge of the mountain's commandments for dozens of years, he still had to attend to everything personally. When he was approaching the main hall, he sensed her unusual aura. The elderly Taoist was well aware that, to be precise, she was the first one to discover him, and then she deliberately revealed some clues. The old Taoist followed her line of sight and saw a devout believer kneeling 3 times and kowtowing 9 times on a futon. Although his body was extremely weak, the etiquette of kowtowing was meticulous. The old Taoist was very familiar with this. When he was young, he was brought to the mountain by his master, Huang Manshan, to cultivate. He was Wang Zhongluo and Song Jiming senior and junior brothers. Now that he was almost 100 years old, the old Taoist had been burning incense for people for nearly 80 years. The old Taoist said with emotion, people pray to immortals for longevity, for relief from worries, for freedom from suffering. The tall woman in white said indifferently, then why does Wudong Mountain want to cut off the thoughts of all the cultivators in the world? The old man was none other than Wudong's enlightened immortal Chen Yao, the senior brother of the former leader Hong Shixiang, and the senior uncle of the current leader Li Yufu. The old man smiled and said, Master Tantai, I only know the rules and regulations of this mountain. I know what should be done and what should not be done. But if you ask me about the art of immortality, or some other bigger questions, I would be asking the blind. If you had climbed the mountain earlier, my master, senior brother, and junior brother would have been able to answer. Even if you had climbed the mountain 10 days earlier, the chief would have been able to answer. Tantai calmly withdrew her gaze and looked up at the majestic statue of Zhenwu the Great Emperor. It was high and mighty, overlooking the world. Is it hard to understand? Or do you not want to understand? Why did the spring and autumn period fall? Why did the central plains sink? It was because a small group of tycoons had blocked the entire world's path to prosperity. It was obvious that if the current emperor of Liang discriminated against the white-clothed Han clan and only promoted the descendants of aristocratic families to fill the imperial court, the fate of the Zhao clan would not last long. Running water doesn't rot. The pivot doesn't rust. How simple is this logic? The old Taoist smiled and nodded. Grandmaster Tantai is right. Tantai Pingjing asked again, is the ambition of Mount Wudong so great that they want to turn the whole world into a separatist town? The old Zhenren asked, in the eyes of sect master Tantai, the mortals in the human world are inferior to the immortals in the heavens? Tantai Pingjing rudely stretched out her finger and pointed at the statue. Isn't it? Then why is this statue able to sit high up and look down, making people willingly bow their heads and enjoy 1,000 years of incense? The old Zhenren was not annoyed by the disrespectful behavior of the former leader of the Qi cultivators in the south. He shook his head and said, it's still the same as what I said before. When people pray for immortals to grow old, they have to ask for something. I'll be bold to make an inappropriate analogy. It's like the officialdom at the foot of the mountain or the marketplace. When you ask for someone's favor, you always have to bring some gifts. When you talk to someone, you always have to lower your voice. That's how it is. That's how it is. But it doesn't mean that the person who is being asked can do whatever he wants. The old Zhenren, who was not talkative, started to talk. His tone was a little heavier. I heard that the immortals in the heavens are good at fishing for the fate of the human world. The lifespan of a person and the national throne of a country are all under their control. If it's just that the heavens are ruthless, it's fine that people don't die early because they're evil, and people don't live long because they're kind. But if you put yourself in their shoes, how sad is it when you think that your fate of marriage, lifespan, fortune, and so on are all controlled by others? How sad is that? My master once told us 6 brothers that the heavens are vigorous, and a gentleman should constantly strive for self-improvement. He's willing to work hard for the difficulties in life. He's not willing to be born with a good life and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. He's not willing to have everything be inflexible. Although we Taoists are people outside the mountain, we can't forget that we're still people of the world. We live in the world and die in the world. From ancestor Lu to Huang Manshan, to Chen Yao's generation of Wang Zhongluo, Song Jiming, Yu Xingrui, Wang Xiaoping, and Hong Xixiang. None of them could live forever. Some of them couldn't and didn't want to, such as Song Jiming and Chen Yao. Some of them could but weren't willing, such as Wang Zhongluo and Yu Xingrui. Some of them were disdainful, such as Hong Xixiang and Wang Xiaoping. Chen Yao suddenly laughed out loud. He turned his head and looked straight at this land immortal who was said to have reached the celestial realm. He was fearless. How many people can ascend in the human world in 100 years? Among the few people, who isn't a banished immortal who descended to the human world? Why? Who is Grandmaster Tantai trying to persuade? I only know that the person who can make Sect Master Tantai do this is definitely not this Zhenwu Great Emperor. Tantai Pingjing frowned. A strange smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She asked, have you ever wondered if the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, and your sect master Li Yufu are banished immortals? Why do they have to commit treason in this world? Chen Yao's face was full of righteousness. He laughed and said, I'm only in charge of Wudong's commandments. Why should I care about that? Tantai Pingjing's face was cold. What a Wudong mountain! As expected of ancestor Lu's dojo. Chen Yao still smiled and said, you flatter me. Tantai Pingjing turned and looked, her eyes snow-white. Yu Xingrui stood outside the door of the main hall. However, she looked directly at the small lotus peak outside the big lotus peak. In the next moment, her figure dissipated. Yu Xingrui, who hurried over, was relieved. Chen Yao slowly walked towards this junior apprentice brother. The old spiritual master, who was famous for being serious, made a rare joke. Junior apprentice brother Yu, quickly wipe your sweat. Yu Xingrui asked worriedly, are we letting her go just like that? Chen Yao said open-mindedly, actually, the fact that she's willing to show herself at this time means that she doesn't have any killing intent. Think about it. His Highness is on the mountain, Dong Tai is here, Li Xiaoxin is here, and so many grandmasters are here. Who would dare to behave atrociously here? After all, she's not Wang Xianji from Martial Emperor City. Yu Xingrui nodded and said, That's true. Chen Yao suddenly asked, Have you really thought it through? Yu Xingrui said in a low voice, Unlike you guys, I, Yu Xingrui, have been born and raised in Liangzhou for generations. Chen Yao patted Yu Xingrui's shoulder unceremoniously. Then go without worry. There's Yu Fu, Han Gui, and that Yu Fu. They're all very good. Yu Xingrui said regretfully, Unfortunately, I probably won't be able to wait until the day junior apprentice brother becomes enlightened. Chen Yao nodded. Senior apprentice brother is about the same. Senior apprentice brother, can I talk to you about something? Go ahead. Junior apprentice brother is still so young. He's at the age where he loves to sleep. How can there be an elder like you who knocks on his door every day before dawn? Junior apprentice brother, are you the disciplined Taoist on our mountain or me? Is there anything else? Chapter 1895. Yes, junior brother is occasionally greedy and stealthily buys some candied haws and other snacks when he interprets the lot for others. Senior brother, can you not be so discerning every time? He is so young, but he has to copy the scriptures several times. I feel sorry for him. Jade Axe has been quietly waiting outside the room every time. Senior brother almost forgot that junior brother is now your disciple's disciple in name. The three of you are very close. Senior brother, you are a little jealous, aren't you? Haha, I can't help it. Junior brother has accepted a good disciple. Junior brother, aren't you supposed to be on duty today? How do you have time to chat with senior brother here? Copy Taoist Ishu tonight. Senior brother. Then you should be striking the chime at this time. Haha, I can't help it. Senior brother is in charge of Wudong Mountain's commandments. In front of the lot booth, Su Su and the other two had gone far away. Wei Miao was still in the distance. The enchanting Miao woman who had been married for a long time was sitting on the bench in front of the table in high spirits. She looked at the young lord who had begun to close the booth and said in a bad Central Plains official's accent, Little handsome brother, do you also interpret the lot for me? Su Fingnian couldn't help laughing and said, Sister, you have been married for many years. Why are you still asking for marriage? She said carelessly, I can't help it. My man is not afraid of anything. He is just afraid that I don't want him. I don't have any thoughts. I just want to see if I married badly. Wei Miao, who was short and average-looking, grinned. As a man and one of the few martial arts grandmasters in Zhonghu at that, his temper was really too good to be true. Su Fengnian looked at the couple and said firmly, No need to look. It must be a good lot. The Miao woman hesitated and finally gave up. When Wei Miao left, he turned his head and looked deeply at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian naturally wouldn't take away the table and the stool. He also didn't intend to take the lot. Of course, there were a small mountain of copper coins, not a single coin less. This was the life-saving money for him to make up for his mistakes. At this moment, Su Fengnian was slightly stunned. A young woman wearing a wooden hairpin and a cloth skirt slowly walked over. Even if her clothes were shabby, even if she didn't know any martial arts, her unique aura that seemed to be tainted with the arrogance of the Tian family could be seen at a glance. She held a cloth bag in her arm, which was filled with golden persimmons that had just been picked from the trees. Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. She was on Mount Wudong, while Gu Jiantang had just come up the mountain. Actually, it was not appropriate for either of them to meet each other. One of them was a princess who had died of illness in the palace according to the history books of the imperial court. The other was a great pillar of the country who was loyal to the Zhao family of Liyang. It was none other than Princess Sui Zhu, Zhao Fengya. She was sitting on a bench that had already been closed, facing him. Su Fengnian returned to his seat and helplessly asked, Why are you here? She smiled indifferently and said, Let's see if I can shake out the first lot. Su Fengnian was about to speak when she continued, Where did you hide it? Take it out, otherwise how can I shake it out? Su Fengnian shook his sleeve unabashedly, and a bamboo stick fell out. She sneered and said, You really know how to do business. Even if you can't become the king of Bailiang in the future, you can still hide in the Central Plains and become rich. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, Should I say that you have a crow's mouth, or should I say that I'm borrowing your auspicious words? She said with a cold face. Lot cylinder. She was as arrogant as she was in the past. Su Fengnian only cared about money and not people. You have 100 copper coins? She picked up a ripe persimmon from the cloth bag and put it on the table. Su Fengnian widened his eyes. It was not because of the arrogance of Princess Li Yong in the past. It was because of the appearance of another princess behind Zhao Fengya. It was just the princess of Dechu in the past. Zhao Fengya turned her head and glanced at her. Oh, the female sword immortal who likes to fly around and show off her power has come. Jiang and I said unhappily, It's none of your business. For some reason, Jiang and I felt that the culprit who had once destroyed her vegetable garden, even if she had become the emperor of West Chu, even if she was now a female sword immortal, she still did not have the confidence to face Zhao Fengya, who was supposed to be a fallen phoenix who was inferior to a chicken. In terms of fighting, when they first met, Zhao Fengya, the Princess Sui Zhu who was familiar with archery and horses, was slightly better. Now, Jiang and I could probably beat down 1,000 Zhao Fengjias. But the more this was so, the less Jiang and I wanted to fight. In terms of cursing, Jiang and I was probably not Zhao Fengya's opponent in the past, present, and future. Zhao Fengya said domineeringly, First come, first served. I'll shake the lot first. Jiang and I curled her lips, but she did not dare to say anything in response. Su Fengnian sighed and put down the bamboo tube. Zhao Fengya raised her head and said, When shaking the lot, don't do anything. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and waved his hand, indicating for Zhao Fengya to quickly shake the lot. Zhao Fengya picked up the bamboo tube with one hand and casually turned it a few times. She gently tossed out a bamboo stick. She casually picked it up and glanced at it. Then the corners of her mouth curled up. She turned her head to look at Jiang and I, who was clearly much more nervous than she was, and heavily slapped down the bamboo stick. She stood up and left, unkindly taking the persimmon with her. Only when Zhao Fengya turned around did Jiang and I sneakily pick up the bamboo stick. Shock, grievance, resentment, and sadness appeared one by one on her devastatingly beautiful face. In the end, she was on the verge of tears. The confused Su Fengnian leaned over to take a look. Su Fengnian somewhat understood Su Su's feelings. It really was tit for tat. The lot in Jiang Ni's hand was the lot that Zhao Fengya had casually shaken out. A good match? A celestial beauty. What more could a husband ask for? The first lot. Su Fengnian pressed his hand to his forehead, speechless. Alas, the copper coins that he had spent so much effort to obtain had been completely earned for nothing. Su Fengnian could not help but be careful. He was afraid that this pitiful little mud person in front of him would also do the same, casually. She only needed to lift her hand, and a great Liang dragon sparrow would fly out of the red sandalwood sword sheath in the thatched hut. Su Fengnian could not help but sigh, feeling sad. She quickly threw the lot back into the bamboo tube like it was scalding her hand. Then she turned her head and wiped her face. She turned her head again, not looking at Su Fengnian or the lot tube. She only stared at the mountain of copper coins. She asked in a soft voice, You earned all of this in the afternoon? Su Fengnian, who was filled with sorrow, nodded his head. Her tone suddenly became light. How much? Su Fengnian said in a soft voice, It's not a small amount. If it's converted to silver, it should be around 100 taels. Her eyes immediately lit up. Her originally dark and gloomy face was glowing. She raised her head and asked in a probing voice, It's all mine. Su Fengnian held back his laughter. Of course. Su Fengnian stood up and struck while the iron was hot. He gave Jiang and I a large cloth bag that he had prepared earlier. Help me hold the money, it's a bit heavy. She nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. She quickly stood up and walked around the table, standing beside him. She bent down and opened the bag with both hands. Her eyes were very serious, and her face was filled with anticipation. Su Fengnian placed his elbow on the table and swept the money into the bag. The copper coins on the table were squeezed together, and the copper coins in the bag were knocked together, making a clattering sound. In the beginning, her smile was still reserved, but she did not hide it anymore. His hands did not stop moving. He only secretly turned his head to look at the side of her face, looking at that dimple. Being liked by someone was the most joyous thing in the world. She did not look away as she said with a smile, It's really heavy. Su Fengnian replied, When we go back, I'll carry the bag. She nodded her head and said, N. Chapter 1896. The group of 4 passed through the golden persimmon forest of Little Lotus Peak and came to the turtle-carrying tablet at the top of the mountain. It was built under the orders of the Great Feng dynasty. The inscription on the tablet was, "The Great Peak of the Imperial Taoist Ancestral Court," which symbolized the glory of Mount Wudong hundreds of years ago. The only woman among the 4 tourists held a ripe persimmon in her hand. She stood under the turtle-carrying tablet and looked up to read the inscription. The other 3 men stood side by side on the cliff, looking at the scenery at the foot of Mount Wudong. The oldest man stood in the middle with a saber at his waist. On his left was a thin swordsman with a long sword on his back. On his right was an elegant scholar with white hair. Then, when the beautiful woman turned her head, she saw a strange scene. She didn't know when there was only one person left standing on the cliff. It turned out that the swordsman and saber had retreated dozens of steps and were not far from her. She gently walked to the 2 elders and asked the old man with the saber softly, "Grandpa Mao, Uncle Ching is?" The 3 of them were Lin Hongyuan, the young master of the Southern Dragon Palace, Mao Shulang, and the sword master Ji Lu En. Mao Shulang, with white hair and eyebrows, lowered his voice and said concisely, "Chi-ji." Lin Hongyuan naturally couldn't understand such a riddle. He turned to look at Ji Lu En, the chief visiting official of the Dragon Palace. The latter hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Old Cheng, as the first distinguished Confucian scholar of the old Southern Tang, was born in a noble family, but he didn't like fame. He traveled all over the country all year round. Previously, he felt guilty for not being able to do as he wished when his country was destroyed. So he started to practice martial arts. After so many years, he climbed up step by step on the path of martial arts. Finally, for some reason, he stayed in the finger-profound realm for as long as 20 years. This trip to Liang, he accumulated a lot and showed signs of breaking through. It is similar to Chao Chongqing of West Chu and Shenyuan Jingqing of Mount Hui." Lin Hongyuan was surprised. Uncle Cheng is finally going to enter the celestial state? Mao Shulang didn't care if she was the future master of the Dragon Palace, nor did he care about her relationship with the Southern King. "Quiet." Lin Hongyuan suddenly kept quiet and blushed. Cheng Baishuang clasped her hands behind her back and gazed towards the south. The old Confucian scholar stood on the edge of the cliff and muttered to himself, outside the body, grasping the tail of a spear and speaking plainly, "It's really like drawing a cake. Orifices within orifices. Ask the praying mat what is going on in your heart. Only then will you be at peace. Moral essays are destroyed, but the spirit is everlasting. Fame and fortune will vanish in the wake of the world, but integrity will never change. If you don't frown in your life, there won't be anyone in the world who will be angry." How ridiculous! The old man slowly closed his eyes. The wind blew against his face and his sleeves fluttered. Mao Shulang's eyes suddenly widened. In an instant, he had already unsheathed his saber. His figure swept forward, brushing past Cheng Baishuang, who seemed to be resting with her eyes closed. He crashed into the edge of the cliff, and was only 1 step away from falling off the cliff. The old man's saber was silent, but it was filled with boundless energy. It was as if a bright crescent moon had appeared in front of him. Lin Hongyuan saw a woman in white appear out of nowhere in the sky above the cliff. She leaned back, her sleeves fluttering. She stretched out 2 fingers and blocked Mao Shulang's Gang Qi. The immortal-like woman in white retreated for dozens of feet before offsetting the powerful and unparalleled Gang Qi. The tall woman stood up straight and hovered in the air with no foothold. The mountain wind was whimpering under her feet, and the clouds were lingering around her. Lin Hongyuan gasped. She recognized the identity of the uninvited guest. Tantai Pingjing of the Guanyin sect, the leader of the Qi cultivators in the world. Although Lin Hongyuan was always at a disadvantage in the scheming against the young lords, in fact, she was not stupid. Instead, she was extremely intelligent. She immediately understood that Cheng Baishuang's natural ascension this time was not as simple as reaching the celestial phenomenon from the finger Xian. Mao Shulang, who was furious, did not care whether he would disturb Cheng Baishuang's state of oblivion. He said to the immortal in white in a stern voice, "If you want to make trouble, you have to ask my saber first." Tantai Pingjing glanced at the old Confucian who was unaware of the outside world and said calmly, "How many days of glory can you have?" Mao Shulang clenched the hilt of his saber, squinted and said in a deep voice, "I'm just a boorish man. I don't understand the mystery of Tantai Pingjing." Tan Tai Ping Jing no longer paid attention to Mao Shulang. She looked away slightly and said to Chang Baishuang, "Since you have such a state of mind, you should know that there will be at most 4 or 5 Earth immortals in the future. The 3 sects of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism will occupy 1 or 2 places in the Jianghu. At this time, you forced yourself to break the realm. Not only is there a fine line between you and the realm of Earth immortals, but you also gave up the sage of Confucianism. What's the difference between this and seeking death?" Chang Baishuang slowly opened her eyes and said frankly, "Is the sage of Confucianism still the sage of Confucianism? I, the sage of Confucianism, once said that people are not afraid of death. Why should I fear death? Today, I, Chang Baishuang, have never coveted immortality. Why should I tempt it with immortality?" Tan Tai Ping Jing sneered. "You are all frogs at the bottom of the well." Chang Baishuang was high-spirited. She laughed loudly and said, "It is said that capable ministers are born in prosperous times and famous generals are born in troubled times. It is also said that poets are lucky when the country is unfortunate. I, Chang Baishuang, have made some sour poems. I am not willing to nod my head and agree. When the country is in trouble, I am willing to die. Even if I die, I have no regrets. How can we, scholars, let the warriors on the battlefield enjoy the beauty alone?" Tan Tai Ping Jing sneered, "If you want to die, just die. You are just another lonely ghost of Confucianism in my sect's water moon courtyard." Chang Baishuang smiled boldly and said loudly, "That's good. Today's people are worthy of the ancients." Tan Tai Ping Jing was silent and looked indifferent. Lin Hongyuan opened his eyes wide and his mind swayed. He stared at the beautiful and tall woman in a daze. Lin Hongyuan was no stranger to Qi cultivators who claimed to enforce justice on behalf of heaven. There were several such strange people around Zhao Bing, the king of Yan Qi. They all had a cold aura that looked at the world as if they were watching a fire burning across the river. They were extremely unreasonable. Those immortals in white hated the fame and fortune that ordinary people all yearned for. They were silent all year round. When ordinary people interacted with them, they would not expect them to bare their hearts to you. Because Tan Tai Ping Jing was a woman, Lin Hongyuan had always worshipped her. Jiang Enai was another worthy female sword fairy after Wu Su, and Shenyuan Qingfeng was also a character with the best cultivation in Jianghu. However, these 2 women were after all too young. It was difficult for the proud Lin Hongyuan to sincerely admire them. Tan Tai Ping Jing was different. She was 100 years old, but her face was still youthful. She was an immortal in the human world. Therefore, the person that Lin Hongyuan admired and envied most in his life was undoubtedly Tan Tai Ping Jing. It should be known that the old beauty of a famous general was especially pitiful. Lin Hongyuan had all kinds of ambitions since a long time ago. One of them was to ask Tan Tai Ping Jing about the unique method of retaining one's youthful appearance. Lin Hongyuan hoped that she would die young. Unfortunately, Tan Tai Ping Jing came and went without a trace. She did not even look at Lin Hongyuan from the beginning to the end. Ji Lu En and Chang Baishuang had known each other for dozens of years. Their relationship was the most sincere. He said sadly, "Old Cheng, is it really like what Tan Tai Ping Jing said?" Chang Baishuang did not hide. He nodded and said, "My celestial state is indeed spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. I can't maintain it for a long time. As for becoming a Confucian saint one day, I don't even think about it." Ji Luan sighed deeply. Chang Baishuang comforted his best friend. A scholar should always put what he learned into practice. What's the benefit of being a prime minister in the mountain and an immortal in the forest? Ji Luan exhaled deeply and said in a low voice, "Fine. I'll accompany you to the outside of Liangzhou Pass." Chang Baishuang asked with a smile, "Why do you want to go?" Ji Luan pointed at the long sword on his back. "This old friend of mine hasn't cut off the head of a Beimang barbarian." Lin Hongyuan was shocked. If Chang Baishuang, who had no roots in Jianghu, wanted to stay in Beiliang, she, as a minor leader of Jianghu in Nanjiang, didn't care. But if the chief guest of the sect also stayed, she would not be able to explain it to Mr. Naylan. Mao Shulang, who had sheathed his sword, suddenly said, "Count me in." Lin Hongyuan was stunned. She came with 3 grandmasters of martial arts, but when she left, she was going to be all alone? In addition to staying young forever, her other ambition was to arm wrestle with Shenyuan Qingfeng and become the second female leader of Wulin in Liang. Mao Shulang, Chang Baishuang, and Ji Lu En, who were close to her, were originally indispensable helpers for her to reach the top of Jianghu. Lin Hongyuan knew that once they made up their minds, perhaps only Mr. Naylan could persuade them to change their minds. She thought of her evil plan not long ago and murmured, "Karma is not good." The Confucian scholar Cheng Baishuang looked into the distance again and said loudly, "For no reason," Confucius said. 300 poems in a word, the most moving part is thinking without evil. The old scholar with white hair on his temples was full of smiles at this moment. In the past, young people thought without evil. In their twilight years, they should be like this. Chapter 1897. In the darkness of the night, the young lord who had just been kicked out of his small wooden bed moved a bamboo chair to sit under the eaves. He did not treat himself too badly. He did not forget to bring out a pot of green ant wine and a plate of peanuts. He did not drink the wine. The small plate was placed on his robe, and he slowly ate the peanuts one by one. The night was long, so he should eat sparingly. Su Fengnian sighed. Haste makes waste. He thought that she was in a good mood because he had helped her earn so many copper coins. In fact, she did let him touch the small bed. However, when his paw just touched a certain place that was finally not peaceful, he was immediately met with an unexpected disaster before he had time to savor it. Su Fengnian lowered his head and glanced at his crotch. He said sadly, "Jianghu's loyal young man, you enjoy the blessings, and I bear the difficulties. That's loyal enough, right?" After muttering, Su Fengnian leaned back in the chair and held the back of his head with his hands. He looked up and saw the bright moon in the sky. It was autumn, and the night was as cold as water. Su Fengnian was aware of the confrontation between Gu Jiantang and the white-robed monk during the day, as well as the disturbance caused by Tantai Pingjing in the two lotus peaks. He even knew that Gu Jiantang and Tantai Pingjing finally met at the foot of the mountain. There were some things that he could not care about and he could not care about. If he really cared about it, it would only add to his troubles. Huta City, the northernmost city outside of Liangzhou Pass, and Beimeng, the center of the army with the most troops, advanced on 3 fronts. They were strictly organized and watertight. Fortunately, Chao Wei and Xie Shibian joined hands and achieved a great victory at Miyun Pass in the western regions, which was beyond everyone's expectations. However, the 2 cavalry troops under Xie Shibian's command, as well as the horse bandits recruited by Han Wenbao and Chai Dongdi, were almost completely wiped out. The Huaiyang Pass Governor-General had already made an exception to promote Xie Shibang to Deputy General of Liuzhou. He was temporarily in charge of the 2 towns of Linyao and Fengxiang, and the 20,000 monk soldiers of Lantua Mountain were also under his command. Xie Shibian's cavalry didn't suffer too many losses. Mount Qingliang and the Governor-General Manor hastily came to a temporary decision, deciding to have Xie Shibian lead the troops to charge north. Together with Yulwan's Saber Division's Yuzhou elite cavalry that was already approaching northern Mang's Gentleman's Pavilion, they formed a coordinated force to advance side by side, directly assaulting the southern dynasty's west capital. Yuzhou Gourd Pass was calm. The group of 20 or so swordsmen that had left the Wu family sword tomb could take this opportunity to lead a small group of cavalry outside the pass. Although it was just icing on the cake, it was still a good thing. North of Qingcang City in Liuzhou, Huang Manor and Ko Zhenghuai's 2 cavalry units were ready to set off. This afternoon, he had reached an agreement with Su Su. The 20,000 Shu Zhao soldiers were not like a drop in the bucket, but they could only be used as a surprise force outside of Liangzhou Pass. In a battle where there was very little room to maneuver, it was not a good thing to fight a battle where the sword needed to be unconventional. Su Fengnian hoped that in the end, there would be no need for the 20,000 soldiers to rush to the battlefield. As for the message that Wei Miao sent to Chen Jibao, saying that he would not stop this old man's son Zhao Dingxiu's troops from crossing Shu until Yang, it could be trusted, but not completely trusted. Currently, the northern and southern territories near Guangling River were in a mess. Yan King Zhao Bing, Shu King Chen Jibao, King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, and Liyang, these 3 vassal kings were working together. Maybe the Liyang court that was loyal to the Zhao family still felt that with Gu Jiantang, the stabilizing force, the court still had some advantage. However, Su Fengnian knew that Gu Jiantang's fate with the Zhao family of Great Peace City had come to an end. His son-in-law Yuan Tingshan had betrayed the court during the spring snow-building celebratory feast. In the eyes of outsiders, he had given his father-in-law, Gu Jiantang, a difficult problem. However, that ambitious mad dog had also gone with the flow. Right now, Su Fengnian, other than the situation outside the Guanbai border, was truly worried about the grain that the court had promised before entering Liang. With his friendship with King of Jing and Zhao Sun, and the fact that Zhao Sun was about to be pushed onto the dragon throne, it would be strange if the quartz grain could be smoothly transported to Lingzhou. Originally, these things were not a problem. Even if Zhao Sun really did put on the dragon robe, he was just a puppet. He could speak, but he could not truly change the situation. Even if Yan King Zhao Bing was wary of Bailiang, as long as Zhao Zhu was there, he could still change the situation. However, ever since he met Lin Hongyuan, Su Fengnian had to prepare for the worst, which was that Bailiang would face the greatest predicament of being attacked from the front and back. Su Fengnian carefully chewed on a peanut and calmly said, "Zhao Zhu, you forced me to fight with you. Even if I can't sit on that throne in the future." Su Fengnian sighed and did not say any harsh words. That evening, the Gerfalcon sent a secret message from Wutongin on Mount Qingliang. It only had 4 words. "They have arrived at Liangzhou." These 4 words were personally written by his second sister, Su Weisheng. Furthermore, one could tell that she had written them with great care. This was a secret matter that had been planned for a long time. Even the Whisk Room and the Eagle Room did not participate in it. From beginning to end, it was only Su Weisheng who planned it. A few years ago, when Su Fengnian traveled the Jianghu for the second time, other than the old man with the sheepskin fur coat and the little mud man, there was also Lu Qiantang, who later died in the reed marsh, and Xu Xiu, who was very likely to be the empress. There were quite a few people. Among them, the plump woman holding the white cat was very inconspicuous. In the end, she was borrowed by Su Weisheng from Su Fengnian and brought to Shangyin Academy. At that time, Su Weisheng said something very strange. He said that he wanted to use Yu Wei, whose real name was Yu Xuanji, as bait to fish out a 1,000-year-old turtle from the mud at the bottom of the lake. In fact, Su Fengnian did not think too much about it and had almost forgotten about it. This year, Yu Wei, as Mr. Ji Shang of the academy, led a group of students from Bailiang Academy to study in Bailiang and began to teach in various academies in Bailiang. Only then did Su Weisheng tell him about what happened that year. It turned out that Yu Wei did not just have an extraordinary background. As a member of Dechu, Li Chungang had casually mentioned that there were female sword attendants in Dechu for generations. With their brilliant sword dance, they stood out in the world. Their cultivation was not high, but their skills were profound. It was really a strange thing. Yu Wei's mother was the last eccentric sword attendant of Dechu. Her chess skills were on par with that of the state preceptor Li Mi. As for why she was so amazing, it was originally a confusing secret of the Jiang family of Dechu. With the end of the Battle of the Western Wall, it was buried in the dust of history. Naturally, the world did not know. During the years when Su Weisheng was studying in Shangyin Academy, he only addressed 3 people as Mr. 2 of them were his teachers. One was the master of literature, Han Guzi, whose disciples were almost all taken in by Bailiang. The other was Chancellor Wang, who was the first to seek refuge with the Su family of Bailiang. He was also the leader of the scholars who died in the cold. The last one, Su Fengnian, was only heard to be a blind old zither player. He lived in the Dao De Forest of Shangyin Academy all year round. The news from Su Weisheng that he has arrived in Liangzhou was precisely this person. An unworldly master was still in the human world. Ordinary martial artists would think that this was nonsense. But ever since Su Fengnian met the eunuch of Tai and City who was the same age as Gua, or even earlier, when he met the real celestial being Gao Shu Lu, he began to understand a truth. Now, there was one more person in the world who could not be understood by common sense. Tan Tai Ping Jing. This sentence was not nonsense, it was obviously a lie. The scholars who could become the sage of Confucianism, from the sage of the Zhang family in the north to Chao Chongqing in West Chu, did not have a good ending. People of the same 3 religions, Buddhism and Taoism, almost every generation had people who succeeded in proving their Tao, reaching perfection, or ascending. Why was it that only Confucianism did not have a good ending? Tan Tai Ping Jing once used her identity as a qi cultivator to explain that it was caused by the Tao of heaven. Su Fengnian felt that what she said made sense, but she did not explain the whole reason. Su Fengnian, who was in a daze, suddenly remembered something. He put down the wine pot and plate, got up and ran to fetch water. Late at night, the elephant washing pool should have finally quieted down. Then, he filled the water tank with water. But just as Su Fengnian pushed open the green bamboo fence, he could not help but jump up and curse. In the middle of the night, there were 2 groups of people coming to the elephant washing pool. Chapter 1898. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment. He didn't care anymore. Those Jianghu ruffians could do whatever they wanted. If they really pissed him off, he would let those bastards have a taste of the cool autumn air and cold water bath. He carried the burden and continued to walk in that direction. Stepping on the fragmented moonlight shining through the bamboo forest and approaching the elephant washing pond, Su Fengnian already had a rough understanding of the situation. Two groups of foreign Jianghu people had a conflict when they were burning incense during the day. Because Bailiang's laws were harsh and they had already learned a bloody lesson, they didn't dare to fight in public. The two sides agreed to spar at the elephant washing pond in the middle of the night and secretly signed a life and death agreement. They were not allowed to bring weapons and were responsible for their own lives. After the event, they were not allowed to tell the local authorities of Bailiang at the foot of Mount Wudong. Even if they accidentally leaked it, they had to grit their teeth and not implicate others. When Su Fengnian reached the end of the bamboo forest, he stopped and looked up. He saw two groups of people fiercely confronting each other by the elephant washing pond. 7 or 8 people against 20 people. There was a great disparity in numbers, but the former's momentum was stronger, while the latter's military strength was superior. However, the situation was somewhat silent, allowing the leader of the 7 or 8 people to poke and point at their noses. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked. On the huge rock in the middle of the pond, a graceful figure that was originally lying on her back sat up. The woman basking in the moonlight in the middle of the night didn't make a big noise, but when it was discovered by some Jianghu people with sharp ears and eyes, the atmosphere instantly became awkward. After she sat up straight, she faced the two groups of people who were speechless and said, "You guys continue. Don't pay attention to me." Everyone looked over. The water in the pond swayed and the moonlight dazzled. They saw her sitting alone on the rock with a pair of boots neatly placed on her left and a jug of wine on her right. Her appearance was not outstanding, but at this moment, it made her look hazy and made her look even more beautiful. After she opened her mouth to speak, the wine emboldened people, and the beauty emboldened them even more. The burly man who was originally pointing at people's noses and scolding them suddenly shouted with a thunderous voice. He heavily clenched his fist and slapped his chest. "Wang Songfeng. I've roamed Jianghu for dozens of years. What did I rely on?" He relied on the word, righteousness. "I don't care who was right or wrong between you and Li Bangxian during the day. Since he found me, it means that he treats me, Hong Mingtang, as a friend. Even if you've invited clan leader Tang and great hero Song to help, we'll rely on our own abilities today. According to the rules of the underworld, the one who kneels down in the end will admit his mistake." The short man in front of him rolled his eyes, jumped up, and slapped him in the face. In the pugilistic world, if beating someone up was considered a starting a feud, then beating someone up in the face was considered a starting a feud. As a result, the two sides began to fight because of the woman's interruption. At first, some people still cared about their status, but in the end, they became more ruthless. They used all kinds of unorthodox moves, such as kicking the crotch, the black tiger, the heart, the monkey picking the peach, and so on. Moreover, they seemed to be using them to the point of perfection. There were all kinds of situations where the donkey rolled around and the dog ate shit. Tragic. Su Fengnian, who was watching from the side with a bucket of water, felt pain for the heroes who had been beaten up. How could it not hurt to be slapped in the face and spin a few times in the air before landing on the ground? How could it not hurt to be kicked in the crotch and roll around while clenching their teeth and not crying for their parents? How could it not be heroic? Su Fengnian, who didn't attract any attention, took this opportunity to go to the elephant washing pool and filled 2 wooden buckets with water. The woman had already put on her boots. She floated to Su Fengnian's side with a wine pot in her hand. She had a strange look in her eyes. Su Fengnian stopped what he was doing and asked with a smile, "Manor Master Tong, are you in the mood for leisure?" The young female head of Jinsua Knife Manor said seriously, "Tong Shanquan has engraved the prince's parting words in my heart. Legend has it that the elephant washing pool has always been the place where the Wudong sword maniac Wang Xiaoping practiced his sword. He once used a bamboo sword to cut down a waterfall, so he wanted to come here and try. Unfortunately, he didn't get anything." Su Fengnian said softly, "Everyone has their own fate. There's no need to force it. Especially when you're about to break through a bottleneck, you can't rush it." Tong Shanquan had 2 famous knives at her waist, Wuda and Tianbao. She nodded. She clearly didn't have a knot in her heart about returning home disappointed tonight. This was in line with Su Fengnian's impression of her. She was magnanimous. Su Fengnian shook his shoulder pole out of habit, no different from a villager carrying water in the countryside. Before they parted, he smiled at her and said, "If you don't mind, I'll have someone bring you one of Wang Xianji's fist manuals and some of my own knife skills." Tong Shanquan was stunned. She then asked directly, "Does the prince need me to do something?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Of course." Tong Shanquan blinked her eyes. Su Fengnian continued, "In the future, when you practice the knife and become a knife master even better than Gu Jiantang, it would be even better if Grandmaster Tong could tell others that you were taught by someone in Bailiang when you travel the Jianghu." Tong Shanquan smiled slightly and said crisply, "Okay." At this time, someone sneaked over to them. Su Fengnian turned his head and glared. He shouted angrily, "My father has been the chief of Bailiang's Green Forest for 20 years. You motherfastrous cur, you dare to provoke me?" The person was stunned by his domineering attitude. He weighed the pros and cons. Perhaps it was better to be safe than sorry, so he turned around with his tail between his legs. Su Fengnian turned back and said jokingly, "I didn't say anything wrong. My father has always been the chief of Bailiang's underworld." Tong Shanquan couldn't say anything. Su Fengnian carried the water and left. Tong Shanquan looked at his back. Finally, he turned around slowly, tapped the ground with the tip of his foot, and disappeared. The elephant washing pond was covered in chicken feathers. Su Fengnian returned to the thatched cottage and poured the water into the water jar. When he turned around, he saw Dong Tai. Su Fengnian didn't criticize him. With a serious expression he said, "I'll go get the knife." Dong Tai nodded. Su Fengnian knocked on the door and entered. He picked up the cold knife from the table and left quietly. Not long after, Su Fengnian and Dong Tai stood side by side at the top of the stone steps of Big Lotus Peak. Dong Tai asked calmly, "Do you know who he is?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I don't know." The peach blossom sword deity didn't say anything else. He closed his eyes and rested. Su Fengnian said, "You don't have to do anything unless it's absolutely necessary." Dong Tai remained silent. At the foot of Wudong Mountain, an old man and a young man walked through the archway and slowly climbed the mountain. The young man was called Go Yufeng. He was once the lowest rung in the martial emperor city of Donghai. Until one day, the young man met a strange middle-aged man who carried a bowl into the city. There was another middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance following closely behind. The young man still didn't know that the former was Xie Guanying and the latter was Dong Tai. After the young man left the martial emperor city, he traveled around and met the hunchbacked old man. They traveled west together and came to Bailiang. The young man only knew that the old man's surname was Zhang. He called the old man Grandpa Zhang. The old man was an old-fashioned man who didn't like to smile. He was like a strict old teacher. Fortunately, although the young man didn't learn how to read, he was born simple and polite. The old man and the young man got along well. As the young man walked up the stairs, he muttered, Confucius said, "The way of heaven and earth is broad, thick, high, bright, long and long." Along the way, the old man taught the young man similar phrases when he wanted to say something. The young man just memorized them. If he didn't understand the meaning, he just put them aside. When the young man recited the phrase, Confucius said, "When angry, you forget to eat. When happy, you forget to worry. You don't know that old age is coming." The old man couldn't help but sigh. Old age is coming, and people are about to die. Since the fall of the Great Qin dynasty, for the past 800 years, generations of scholars in the world had to recite the words, Confucius said, in the books of the sages. Now that the imperial examinations were popular in Liang, there were more scholars. Naturally, the words Confucius said were more common. This Confucius said. It was the words of the sage Zhang of the scholarly school. At this moment the old man sighed with emotion. "So, I've said so much." The young man asked, "Grandpa Zhang, what did you say?" The old man smiled for the first time. He rubbed the young man's head and said, "Yufeng, you're my closed-door disciple. You can call me teacher in the future." The young man looked confused. The old man took the young man's hand and continued to climb the mountain. He said calmly, "You have many senior brothers. The youngest one is called Huang Longshi." The young man habitually called him Grandpa Zhang. He asked curiously, "Is it Huang Longshi who has the same name as the great demon of spring and autumn, Huang Sonjia?" The old man laughed it off.